Somewhere in the ancient past, the last person who understood these places disappeared. From that moment on, temples became puzzles, symbols lost their meanings, and extraordinary structures slowly became mysteries. Thousands of years later, we are still trying to reconstruct what they knew from what survived. Stones cut with remarkable precision, enormous foundations buried beneath the earth, passages disappearing into darkness, and monuments whose purpose remains uncertain. Modern technology can reveal chambers behind walls and structures beneath the ground, but it cannot restore the knowledge that once made them understandable. Every discovery brings another piece of that vanished world back into view, yet the complete story remains tantalizingly incomplete. Today, we follow these surviving clues into the places where ancient history still has secrets left to reveal. At Saqqara, roughly 30 kilometers south of modern Cairo, a 5th dynasty tomb built more than 4,000 years ago contains an architectural contradiction. Its most important doors were carved into solid walls and were never intended to open. The mastaba belonged to Nyankhnum and Khnumhotep, two high-ranking officials who served as royal manicurists during Egypt's Old Kingdom, probably in the 25th century BCE. Deep inside their decorated chapel, two elaborate false doors stand side by side on the western wall. They have frames, inscriptions, recessed panels, and the visual language of entrances, yet there are no hinges, movable slabs, or passages through them. For the living, they lead nowhere. Within Egyptian funerary belief, however, these were among the most important thresholds in the entire tomb. The monument was uncovered at Saqqara in 1964 by Egyptian archaeologist Ahmed Musa while investigating the causeway of King Unas. Subsequent clearance revealed a complex sequence of courtyards, corridors, chambers, shafts, reliefs, and underground burial spaces belonging to the two men and members of their families. Its unusually intimate scenes of Nyankhnum and Khnumhotep quickly made the tomb famous, but the architecture surrounding those images is equally remarkable. Instead of placing the physical route to the dead behind the most prominent ceremonial entrances, the builders separated the two systems. A real descending passage led beneath the monument toward the burial chambers, while the doors displayed most prominently to visitors were deliberately sealed by their very construction. The two principal false doors occupy the western wall of the offering chamber, one associated with Nyankhnum and the other with Khnumhotep. They imitate functional architecture in stone, complete with jambs, lintels, and recessed elements, but the resemblance stops at the surface. No person could pull them open because there was nothing to pull. No corridor continued beyond their carved outlines. Their purpose depended precisely on the fact that physical passage was impossible. Egyptian funerary religion treated the false door as a boundary through which the vital aspect of the deceased could symbolically emerge to receive offerings before returning to the realm of the dead. Food, drink, and ritual actions were therefore performed in front of an entrance that no living participant expected to cross. What appears architecturally useless becomes comprehensible only if the tomb is understood as a structure designed simultaneously for two different populations: living visitors moving through physical space, and dead inhabitants moving through sacred space. That distinction becomes even stranger because the builders clearly knew how to construct genuine access routes. The underground burial area was reached through a descending passage beginning from the floor of the second vestibule. Archaeological documentation gives the passage a length of approximately 6.7 meters, a width of about 1.7 meters, and a height near 1.2 meters, descending at roughly 16 degrees. It led toward undecorated subterranean burial chambers where the bodies were placed. The architecture therefore reverses ordinary expectations. The passage that actually reaches the dead is comparatively concealed, while the monumental entrances presented to ritual visitors cannot physically reach them at all. This was not an engineering limitation or an unfinished doorway. The builders intentionally created a visible entrance whose function required it to remain closed forever. Behind this arrangement was another concealed element, the serdab, an enclosed chamber associated with statues representing the tomb owners. Such spaces allowed the physical image of a deceased person to remain permanently within the monument, while offerings and ceremonies occurred outside. The statues originally associated with the complex have disappeared, probably removed in antiquity, leaving uncertainty about their exact original arrangement. Yet the combination is revealing. A visitor could stand before a stone door that could not open, while representations of the dead occupied protected space beyond the accessible ritual zone. The architecture effectively placed the deceased close to the living, without allowing ordinary physical contact between them. The wall was simultaneously a barrier and, according to the religious logic encoded into the monument, a point of communication. The placement of the doors adds another deliberate layer. They occupy the western side of the chapel, a direction deeply connected with death in Egyptian cosmology, because the sun disappeared below the western horizon each evening. Necropolises were frequently associated with this symbolic landscape, and the false door transformed that larger cosmic idea into architecture on the scale of a single tomb. To someone entering the chapel, the western wall marked the end of the room. To the ritual system for which the monument was constructed, it represented a threshold. The question is therefore not whether archaeologists have discovered a hidden mechanical doorway behind the stone, because there is no evidence for one. The deeper problem is how literally ancient Egyptians understood the function of the boundary. Surviving funerary texts, offering formulas and comparable monuments, establish the religious role of false doors. But they cannot fully reconstruct how individuals more than 4 millennia ago conceptualized the deceased passing through a surface that everyone could see was physically solid. The tomb of Niankhnum and Khnumhotep makes this problem unusually powerful because there are two principal false doors rather than one, each preserving the identity of an individual within a monument that repeatedly binds the two men together. Their names themselves form a striking pair. Niankhnum can be interpreted approximately as life belongs to Khnum, while Khnumhotep means Khnum is satisfied. Both men held the unusual court title, often translated as overseer of the manicurists of the great house, placing them within the royal administration. They are shown with wives and children, yet they are also represented together with an intimacy rarely encountered between two male tomb owners in Egyptian art. In several scenes they embrace, and in the innermost chapel, their relationship becomes inseparable from the architecture of the false doors. Most strikingly, a representation of the two men embracing occupies the zone between their principal false doors. Their bodies face one another closely, creating an image positioned precisely where the monument defines access between the living and the dead. Scholars have debated the nature of their relationship for decades. They have been described as brothers, possibly twins, while other interpretations have argued that the unusual physical intimacy may represent a same-sex partnership. Their wives and descendants complicate any simple conclusion, and no surviving inscription explicitly defines the relationship in terms that settle the debate. What can be established is the intentional prominence of their paired representation. Whoever designed the chapel placed their identities separately at two ritual doors while simultaneously joining their images between them. This creates one of the tomb's most intriguing architectural questions. If each false door functioned as a ritual point through which the Ka of its owner could receive offerings. Why was such careful individuality maintained inside a burial monument that repeatedly emphasizes the closeness of the two men? Egyptian mortuary practice normally attached names, titles, and offering formulas to the person whose continued existence they were intended to sustain, so separate doors may simply have guaranteed separate cultic identities. Yet their proximity turns the Western Wall into something more complex than two unrelated memorials. It presents two individual thresholds functioning within one coordinated composition, as though each deceased owner required his own point of emergence, while both remained connected within the same funerary landscape. Evidence of ancient intrusion adds an almost ironic final layer to the design. Nyankhnum's false door survives in a much more damaged condition than Khnumhotep's, and parts of the monument were penetrated by people cutting through the structure after its original use. The builders had created an entrance that could function only symbolically, but later intruders treated the surrounding masonry according to an entirely different logic. If the wall would not open, it could be broken through. A boundary designed for the dead was eventually violated by the living. Yet even this destruction did not reveal the secret corridor that the shape of the doorway might suggest, because none had been intended. Tomb of Ramos, designated TT55, was cut into the limestone cliffs of Sheikh Abdel Qurna on the west bank of ancient Thebes, Egypt, during the 14th century BCE. Built for Ramos, vizier under Amenhotep III, and the early reign of Amenhotep IV, later Akhenaten, the tomb contains one of the most extraordinary unfinished decorative programs of Egypt's 18th dynasty. Yet beneath its celebrated reliefs lies a darker architectural idea. The deepest route through the tomb was created to carry a man into the earth, be sealed behind him, and ideally never function as an entrance again. TT55 became known to European scholars during the 19th century, but systematic clearance in the early 20th century exposed the scale of the monument and its remarkable decoration. Ramos's identity was established through inscriptions naming his offices and family, while the style and royal imagery placed construction near the transition from Amenhotep III to Akhenaten, roughly the middle of the 14th century BCE. The tomb consists of a broad columned hall connected to deeper spaces and the route toward the burial apartments. Archaeologists quickly recognized something unusual. Sections of the monument had received exceptionally sophisticated decoration, while large areas remained unfinished, as though work had stopped during a crucial stage of construction. That contrast is clearest in the Great Hall. Some walls carry exquisitely carved low reliefs in which faces, wigs, garments, and individual strands of hair were modeled with extraordinary precision. Several figures were carved but never fully painted. Elsewhere, painted scenes appear without the same degree of finished carving, and still other surfaces were left comparatively bare. This is not simply the normal deterioration of a 3,300-year-old monument. Different stages of production survive together, preserving something resembling a frozen construction sequence. Stone preparation, preliminary drawing, carving, painting, and final finishing were normally successive operations, yet TT55 preserves these stages side by side because the decorative program was never completed. The obvious explanation is that Ramos died before his tomb was finished, but that answer creates another problem. Ramos was not an obscure official. As vizier, he occupied one of the highest administrative positions in Egypt, and the quality of TT55 demonstrates access to highly skilled craftsmen. Elite Egyptian tombs could remain unfinished when their owners died unexpectedly. Yet, TT55 was being constructed during one of the most disruptive political and religious transformations in Egyptian history. Ramos served at the end of Amenhotep III's reign and remained prominent when Amenhotep IV began introducing the religious changes that culminated in the elevation of the Aten, the transformation of royal imagery, the adoption of the name Akhenaten, and the establishment of a new royal residence at Akhetaten, roughly 300 kilometers north of Thebes. This chronology turns the unfinished walls into historical evidence. Parts of TT55 preserve the refined artistic conventions associated with the reign of Amenhotep III, while other scenes belong unmistakably to the emerging Amarna world. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are represented beneath the rays of the Aten, in a visual language dramatically different from conventional Theban royal imagery. The monument therefore appears to have been under construction, while the rules governing Egyptian sacred art were themselves changing. Whether work stopped primarily because Ramoses died, because craftsmen and resources followed the royal court away from Thebes, because his political position changed, or through some combination of these events cannot be demonstrated with certainty. Even Ramoses' final burial history is less straightforward than the magnificence of TT55 might suggest, because the monument does not provide a complete, securely preserved burial assemblage capable of resolving exactly how its final phase unfolded. The architecture makes that uncertainty even more compelling. Egyptian elite tombs were not designed as houses that remained fully accessible after burial. Their spaces served different audiences. The chapel and decorated halls allowed the living to maintain the deceased's funerary cult, while the burial chamber belonged to a protected subterranean realm. During the funeral, the body and burial equipment had to travel through a physical route into that realm. Once this operation was completed, however, continued access became undesirable. Entrances to burial areas could be blocked, sealed, or concealed because the tomb's deepest architecture had effectively completed its practical purpose. A passage could therefore be engineered, excavated, and finished for a journey intended to occur only once. This reverses the ordinary meaning of a doorway. In a house, a door exists because people expect to pass through it repeatedly. In an Egyptian tomb, the most important threshold could exist precisely so that passage through it would eventually cease. The deceased entered, the living withdrew, the boundary was restored. The physical route was closed while ritual communication continued elsewhere. Egyptian funerary architecture developed this principle even more explicitly through the false door, a symbolic threshold associated especially with the deceased's ability to receive offerings and interact with the world of the living. Such a door could possess jams, inscriptions, and the visual language of an entrance, while offering no physical passage for a human body. It represented movement without requiring an opening. TT55 belongs to this wider funerary logic, but its unfinished state introduces an unusual question. If Ramoses' monument was interrupted before its intended decorative program was complete, how much of its planned transition from accessible funerary chapel to permanently protected burial realm was actually realized as originally conceived? Archaeology can reconstruct the surviving architecture and identify stages of decoration, but it cannot recover every decision made during the final weeks or months of construction. There is no surviving project document explaining when each wall was abandoned, why individual teams stopped working, or whether the political upheaval surrounding Akhenaten directly caused particular unfinished surfaces. The stone records the interruption, but not its cause. The timing is especially striking because Akhenaten's transformation of Egypt was not merely artistic. During his reign, the Aten became dominant in royal religion, traditional divine imagery was increasingly displaced, and the royal court ultimately moved from Thebes to the newly founded city of Akhetaten. Tomb construction there adopted a very different ideological environment. If Ramoses remained tied to Thebes while the center of royal power shifted away, TT55 may have become obsolete before its architectural and decorative ambitions were fulfilled. Yet, there is insufficient evidence to say that a single royal decree abruptly terminated the project. A sudden death remains entirely plausible, while political relocation, changing religious expectations and disruption of workshop organization could have intensified the abandonment. The mystery survives because several historically credible explanations overlap at exactly the same moment. The reliefs preserve that collision more vividly than almost any written description could. Traditional funerary imagery exists beside evidence of a new royal theology, while finished masterpieces stand only meters from surfaces whose intended appearance was never realized. This is why the unfinished portions matter scientifically. Tool marks, carved outlines, painted guidelines, and varying degrees of surface preparation reveal the sequence used by ancient craftsmen. They demonstrate that the apparent incompleteness is not simply the result of later erosion. Work genuinely ceased while different sections were at different production stages, leaving archaeologists with a rare cross-section through the creation of an elite New Kingdom tomb. Behind all of this stands the fundamental purpose of the monument. Ramose was preparing an eternal residence at the exact moment when the religious system defining eternity was being transformed around him. The tomb's decorated spaces were meant to preserve his identity, status, and relationship with the sacred world, while its deepest threshold separated the continuing cult of the living from the protected domain of the dead. Once the burial passed beyond that boundary, opening the route again was not part of its intended function. Tomb robbery and later exploration would reverse that design, turning sealed architecture back into accessible space. But this was precisely what the original builders sought to prevent. Arayastis Monument, near Yazilikaya in Eskişehir Province, Turkey, presents a strange architectural contradiction. A monumental stone facade, shaped like the entrance to a sacred building, yet with no ordinary doorway through which anyone could pass. Carved into the volcanic rock of the Phrygian highlands, the monument became known to scholarship as explorers and archaeologists documented the rock-cut sanctuaries scattered around the ancient Phrygian landscape. It is generally dated to around the 6th century BCE, approximately 550 BCE, when Phrygian religious traditions were still deeply connected to the worship of the mother goddess, Matar, later associated with Cybele. The facade measures roughly 5.5 meters high and 4.2 meters wide, large enough to imitate the front of a substantial building, even though the builders were working almost entirely with the surface of a natural cliff. That imitation is where the problem begins. Arayastis has architectural elements that seem to promise an interior, a triangular pediment, framed panels, geometric decoration, and a carefully defined central composition resembling the facade of a shrine. Yet the rock does not open into a corresponding sanctuary behind it. The builders effectively transformed a cliff into an architectural image. Other Phrygian rock facades show similar principles, suggesting that these monuments were not failed attempts to carve buildings into mountains. The absence of a conventional interior was probably intentional. What looks to modern eyes like an entrance may instead have represented the threshold of a sacred realm, an architectural boundary that was never designed for a human body to cross. Arayastis makes that interpretation more complicated, because the monument itself appears unfinished. On more complete Phrygian facades, the lower central area can contain a niche associated with the cult image of Matar. At Arayastis, however, the expected arrangement is disrupted. A small niche appears unusually high on the facade, immediately beneath the upper frame, while the more conventional lower niche was apparently never completed. Parts of the decoration also seem unfinished. Stoneworkers had already created a facade more than 5 meters tall, requiring careful planning and sustained labor. Yet work seems to have stopped before some of its most important architectural features reached their expected form. Whether this resulted from political disruption, a change in ritual practice, the death of a patron, or a deliberate decision remains unknown. More importantly, archaeologists cannot simply assume that an unfinished appearance meant an unusable sanctuary. It may already have been sacred before every decorative element was finished. The strongest evidence that Ariastis had acquired religious significance comes not from the architecture, but from words cut directly into the stone. 3 separate Old Phrygian inscriptions, conventionally identified as W01A, W01B, and W01C, survive around the monument. One follows the region of the pediment, another occupies rock above the facade, while a third runs beside the monument along a natural edge of the cliff. Their presence turns an already unusual facade into something much harder to interpret, because although scholars can read many of the individual Phrygian letters, reading the alphabet is not the same as understanding the language. Old Phrygian belongs to the Indo-European language family and is preserved in inscriptions dating largely from the 1st millennium BCE. Its alphabet has been deciphered well enough for specialists to transliterate texts, and linguistic relationships with Greek and other Indo-European languages provide important clues. The difficulty is that the surviving corpus is limited. Many words occur only once or a few times, grammatical constructions remain debated, and there is no long bilingual inscription comparable to the Rosetta Stone that provides a complete translation key. At Ariastis, the problem becomes even more unusual because the inscriptions do not all behave in the same visual direction. Sections have been interpreted as running from left to right, while others proceed from right to left, and scholars have disagreed about how particular sequences should be divided and connected. More than 2,500 years after the letters were carved, the stone can still preserve the physical message while withholding much of what the message actually meant. Certain words nevertheless offer fragments of the lost context. The inscriptions contain forms connected by scholars with Matar, the Phrygian mother goddess, and the word from which the modern name Ariastis has been derived. Ariastis, sometimes rendered differently in scholarly readings, may have functioned as an epithet or title associated with the goddess, rather than as the ancient name of the monument itself. Other portions appear to contain personal or dedicatory language. This means the inscriptions were probably not random graffiti added centuries later. They seem intimately connected to the religious identity of the facade, and may have recorded dedication, ownership, divine authority, or rules governing the sacred place. One passage, W01B, is especially provocative. Proposed translations have interpreted part of it as a warning involving the mother goddess, apparently directed against someone who interfered with the monument or improperly placed a name upon it. The exact wording remains uncertain because several Phrygian terms resist secure translation, so it would be misleading to present the inscription as a completely deciphered curse. What can be said is more intriguing. The surviving vocabulary has allowed specialists to detect what appears to be a protective or threatening formula associated with divine punishment. The monument, therefore, combines the image of an inaccessible architectural threshold with writing that may have defined who possessed authority over that sacred surface and what could happen to someone who violated it. This changes the meaning of the apparent door. A physical door controls access by opening and closing. Ariastis may have controlled access symbolically. The facade allowed worshippers to approach the presence of the goddess without entering a chamber. Its architectural frame created the visual expectation of passage, while the solid cliff denied that passage completely. If a cult image once occupied one of its niches, worship could have taken place directly before the rock. Offerings, prayers, or ceremonies could therefore be directed toward a divine presence, imagined as emerging through the facade rather than residing inside a conventional building. Comparable Phrygian monuments strengthen this interpretation. Throughout the highlands of central Anatolia, rock-cut facades reproduce architectural forms in stone, often associated with the cult of Matar. Their repeated use suggests a deliberate religious language in which the mountain itself could become part of the sanctuary. Timber architecture could decay, burn, or disappear, but a facade carved into living rock transformed the concept of a building into something almost permanent. The door consequently did not need hinges, wooden panels, or an accessible room behind it. Its purpose may have depended precisely on remaining closed, because the boundary mattered more than whatever a modern observer expects to find beyond it. Yet Ariastis refuses to fit perfectly, even within that explanation. If its lower cult niche was never completed, why were substantial inscriptions already carved around the facade? If the inscriptions marked a functioning sacred monument, perhaps the unfinished sections were less important than archaeologists assume. Alternatively, construction may have stopped after the site had already been formally dedicated. The sequence cannot yet be reconstructed with certainty, and the undeciphered portions of the inscriptions deny researchers the evidence that might settle the question. Somewhere within those lines could be the name of a patron, a description of the dedication, a ritual instruction, or information explaining why this particular cliff was chosen, but the surviving Phrygian language does not currently allow such claims to be demonstrated. The location adds another layer to the problem. Ariastis stands roughly 1.7 kilometers north of Yazilikaya, within a landscape dense with Phrygian rock monuments, altars, niches, fortifications, and sacred features. It was therefore not an isolated carving made on an arbitrary cliff. The builders were working inside a broader ritual landscape, in which natural rock formations and constructed imagery repeatedly merged. For people moving through this terrain in the 6th century BCE, the facade may have communicated something immediately recognizable that has become obscure only because the religious system surrounding it has disappeared. In 1865, French archaeologist Auguste Mariette uncovered the mastaba of Ti at Saqqara, Egypt, roughly 30 kilometers south of modern Cairo. Built during the 5th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, around the 24th century BC, the tomb belonged to Ti, a powerful official who served under several pharaohs and held titles connected with royal building projects and the administration of Egypt. What Mariette exposed was an unusually well-preserved mastaba, filled with reliefs of farming, fishing, shipbuilding, animal husbandry, food preparation, and daily life. Yet some of its most important architectural features were not passages, chambers, or stairways. They were doors carved into solid walls, deliberately made to resemble entrances even though no living person was ever supposed to pass through them. The clearest examples stand on the western wall of Ti's offering chapel. 2 false doors were constructed there with the visual language of functional architecture: vertical jambs, lintels, recessed panels, inscriptions, and representations of Ti. But behind them, there is no corridor waiting to be entered. They belong to a tradition that had become central to elite Egyptian tombs during the Old Kingdom, in which a false door marked a boundary between the living and the dead. Archaeologists understand its broad religious function reasonably well. The Egyptians believed that the ka, the vital aspect of a deceased person that continued after death, could receive offerings through this symbolic threshold. The mystery is therefore not whether the builders accidentally created a doorway that went nowhere, They knew exactly what they were doing. The more difficult question is why an invisible transition required such carefully constructed physical architecture. One of T's false doors was associated with an alabaster offering table, placing the apparent entrance at the center of a carefully controlled ritual system. Priests or relatives could approach the wall, present bread, beer, meat, and other provisions, and recite offering formulas, but they could never follow T through the doorway represented before them. The food itself remained in the world of the living, while its ritual essence was believed to sustain the dead. In practical terms, the wall remained closed. In religious terms, it was permeable. That distinction makes the structure far stranger than an ordinary sealed entrance, because the Egyptians were not trying to conceal a physical route behind it. They created an architectural object whose effectiveness depended on there being no human passage at all. The arrangement becomes more intriguing because T was not given only one such threshold. 2 false doors occupy the western side of his offering chapel, raising questions about why multiple symbolic access points were required within a single funerary complex. False doors are well documented throughout Old Kingdom Egypt, so their general purpose is not an unsolved archaeological mystery, but the precise logic governing their number, placement, ritual specialization, and relationship to the deceased remains harder to reconstruct in every individual tomb. In T's mastaba, the doors were positioned within an architectural plan, connecting the cult spaces above with the burial system below. T's body had been placed underground, separated from visitors, while the architectural representation of his presence remained accessible in the chapel. The living did not visit the corpse. They visited the boundary through which the dead was expected to receive them. That principle extended beyond T himself. Elsewhere in the mastaba was another false door associated with his wife, Neferhetepes, positioned in relation to her own funerary area, while a false door stela associated with their son Demedji appeared within the wider complex. The pattern suggests something more organized than decorative repetition. Members of the family could possess individual architectural points of contact, even though none functioned as a physical entrance. The mastaba can therefore be read almost as a ritual map in which the location of a deceased person was translated into a doorway on the surface. Instead of opening the burial chambers repeatedly, which would have compromised their protection, the Egyptians constructed permanent interfaces through which ritual contact could continue while the actual dead remained isolated underground. The same idea appears in another remarkable feature of the tomb, T's serdab. A serdab was a sealed chamber intended to contain a statue representing the deceased, and in T's mastaba, one was constructed beside the offering chapel. Narrow openings in the wall allowed communication between the chapel and the hidden statue without creating an entrance large enough for a person. The original statue was eventually removed for preservation, and a replica occupies the space. But the ancient arrangement reveals the extraordinary precision of the concept. T's representation was enclosed where visitors could not physically reach it, yet small openings allowed incense, spoken prayers, and the activity of rituals to connect the two spaces. The false door offered a symbolic route for the car, while the serdab provided another controlled connection to the physical representation of T. Neither required an ordinary doorway. This raises one of the most compelling questions surrounding the architecture. If the false door existed only as a symbol, why reproduce recognizable elements of real entrances with such care? Egyptian false doors could imitate jambs, lintels, recessed openings, and other details derived from actual domestic architecture. The resemblance appears deliberate enough that the object was more than a generic marker for death. It transformed the idea of an entrance into permanent stone. A wooden household door could decay, burn, or disappear. The stone version inside a tomb was intended to survive for generations. Yet durability alone does not explain why the Egyptians believed this architectural simulation could function as a boundary that the dead could cross. Archaeology can reconstruct where offerings were placed and identify inscriptions describing funerary provisions, but it cannot completely recover how an Old Kingdom worshipper understood the moment when a ritual supposedly activated that threshold. The location of the false door on the western side of the chapel also carried meaning. In Egyptian cosmology, the west was intimately associated with death because the sun disappeared below the western horizon each evening before returning in the east. Necropolises were frequently established on the western side of the Nile, and funerary language connected the deceased with the western realm. These doors therefore participated in a much larger geographical and cosmic system. Their orientation, position beside offering installations, relationship with burial shafts, and proximity to spaces containing representations of the deceased all indicate that these were not randomly placed religious decorations. Architecture, landscape, and ritual were being coordinated around a boundary that physically did not exist. Even the separation between T's accessible chapel and inaccessible burial chamber reinforces that contradiction. Mastabas were designed so that funerary cult activity could continue above ground while the corpse remained protected below. Visitors moved through decorated spaces containing remarkably detailed scenes of ordinary Egyptian life, yet their route eventually terminated before surfaces representing passages they could never enter. The walls show cattle being driven, craftsmen working, boats moving through marshes, and people producing food, creating an almost encyclopedic reconstruction of the living world around a dead man. At the center of that artificial world stood a doorway through which only the deceased was conceptually capable of moving. There is an additional irony. When T's burial was eventually investigated, his stone sarcophagus was found without the intact burial its builders had intended to preserve, almost certainly reflecting ancient disturbance and robbery. The physical body that the mastaba had been designed to protect did not remain undisturbed for eternity, yet the architectural mechanism created for his continuing presence survived. More than 4,000 years after T lived, visitors can still stand before doors that retain the shape of entrances while refusing every ordinary definition of one. Aslankaya Monument rises from the volcanic landscape of western Turkey, near the Phrygian highlands of Afyonkarahisar, where more than 2,500 years ago, craftsmen carved the facade of a sanctuary directly into a massive rock outcrop. At its center, they created something strangely familiar, a doorway with doors shown open, complete with architectural details suggesting a real entrance. Yet there is nowhere for a human being to go. The monument had already attracted the attention of 19th century travelers and was recorded by early researchers exploring the remains of ancient Phrygia, while later archaeological surveys documented its architecture, reliefs, and Paleo-Phrygian inscription in greater detail. Scholars generally date Aslankaya to the Phrygian period of the 1st millennium BCE and identify it as a rock-cut cult monument associated with Mata, the Phrygian mother goddess, later closely connected with the Greek and Roman Cybele. The surviving facade is several meters high, although erosion has dramatically altered its lower portion, leaving the monument roughly 3 meters above the present ground surface in places. Its importance, however, lies less in its scale than in the architectural illusion carved into the stone. The facade was shaped to resemble the front of a building. A triangular pediment crowns a carefully organized composition of geometric patterns, structural elements, and supernatural figures. Near the upper section appear 2 winged sphinxes facing one another, while lions dominate other parts of the monument. In the central niche once stood a monumental relief of the Mother Goddess, approximately 2.2 meters high, accompanied by two lions. Damage, weathering, and deliberate destruction have erased much of this image, but early documentation preserves enough information to reconstruct its basic arrangement. Most remarkable are the surfaces on either side of the goddess. They were carved to resemble two open door leaves, including details associated with real wooden doors. Even a locking element or bolt appears to have been represented on the right-hand side. The sculptors were therefore not merely cutting a rectangular recess into the cliff. They were reproducing the visual language of an entrance. And yet the entrance does not lead into a temple chamber. There is no deep sanctuary behind the facade comparable to the interior of a rock-cut tomb. No corridor continues into the mountain, and no hidden burial room has been demonstrated behind the apparent doorway. Instead, the destination of the doorway is the divine figure itself. A visitor approaching Aslankaya would have seen an architectural facade apparently opened before them, only to discover that beyond its doors stood the goddess. This changes the central question surrounding the monument. The mystery is not what the Phrygians concealed behind the door, but why they needed to create a door through which human beings could never pass. One possibility lies in the unusual relationship between Phrygian religion and the landscape. Matar was not simply a deity placed inside buildings. Phrygian cult monuments repeatedly associate her with mountains, cliffs, and exposed rock formations, and monumental facades were carved directly into natural stone. At Aslankaya, architecture and mountain effectively become the same object. Instead of constructing a freestanding temple containing an image of the goddess, the craftsman transformed the rock itself into the appearance of a sacred building. The doorway may therefore have represented a boundary between the visible landscape and a divine realm imagined within or beyond it. The worshipper could approach that boundary, but the physical architecture offered no passage through it. This raises a more difficult possibility. Perhaps the doorway was never intended for humans at all. If the goddess occupied the threshold, the open doors may have represented her appearance rather than the worshipper's entrance. The monument could have visually expressed a moment in which Matar emerged from her inaccessible domain into the human world. Such an interpretation would explain an otherwise peculiar architectural decision. A functional door exists so that people can move from one space to another, but Aslankaya reproduces the form of a door while eliminating that practical purpose. The important movement may instead have been imagined in the opposite direction, from the sacred landscape toward the people standing outside. There is no surviving Phrygian ritual manual confirming this interpretation, and that absence is critical. Archaeologists can reconstruct the monument's imagery far more confidently than the ceremonies performed before it. We do not know whether worshippers gathered at Aslankaya on particular dates, whether offerings were deposited there, whether music or processions accompanied ceremonies, or whether the divine image was ritually revealed in a way echoed by the carved open doors. The architecture preserves the setting of an encounter, while the actions that gave that setting meaning have almost completely disappeared. The animals surrounding the doorway deepen the problem. Lions were strongly associated with the Phrygian mother goddess, and Aslankaya originally showed two beside her, while another large lion was carved on the side of the rock. Above them, paired winged sphinxes occupied the pediment. These creatures may have emphasized divine authority, protection, or the separation of sacred space from ordinary space, although assigning them a single precise function would go beyond the surviving evidence. What remains striking is their placement around an entrance that cannot actually be entered. The entire composition concentrates symbolic power on the threshold itself. Even the physical approach to that threshold is uncertain. The lower part of the outcrop consists of softer sandstone than portions of the rock above and has suffered extensive erosion. C.H.E. Haspels proposed that the lower section might never have been completely finished, while later interpretations have suggested that the vanished area could once have supported steps or another constructed approach. If steps originally climbed toward the facade, worshippers may have ascended toward the false architectural entrance before stopping directly in front of the goddess. If no such arrangement existed, the monument may have functioned differently. Erosion has removed precisely the zone where archaeology might have shown how people physically interacted with the sanctuary. Above the doorway survives another fragment of evidence that might once have clarified its meaning, a Paleo-Phrygian inscription, catalogued as W03. Weathering has made parts of the text extremely difficult to read. Old Phrygian itself is known from a limited corpus of inscriptions dating mainly to the 1st millennium BCE, so damaged examples are particularly difficult to interpret with certainty. The position of the inscription on such a prominent sacred facade suggests that it mattered, but the surviving text does not provide the detailed explanation modern researchers would want. The monument consequently preserves its visual statement far better than its written one: an architectural facade, an opened entrance, a goddess and powerful animals remain recognizable, while the words associated with them have largely fallen silent. Aslankaya also belongs to a broader Phrygian tradition that makes its strange doorway harder to dismiss as decoration. Other rock monuments in the highlands reproduce architectural facades on cliffs without creating conventional buildings behind them. Elements derived from timber construction appear translated into stone, suggesting that craftsmen deliberately transformed recognizable architecture into permanent sacred imagery. They understood what doors, beams, and facades were supposed to do in actual buildings. Their decision to reproduce those features on solid rock was therefore not an engineering mistake. The impossibility of entering was part of the monument's design. That distinction separates Aslankaya from stories of sealed tombs awaiting discovery. There is no archaeological reason to claim that a treasure chamber lies behind the goddess, or that an unexplored corridor waits inside the mountain. Its mystery is more difficult because nothing needs to be hidden behind the stone. The facade itself may have been the sacred mechanism. For the people who stood before it, the boundary between the human and divine worlds may not have required a physical room on the opposite side. Dadan, in the Alula oasis of northwestern Saudi Arabia, preserves a cliff of ancient tomb entrances cut for people who were meant to pass through them only once. High above the ruins of a city that flourished along Arabia's incense routes, rectangular openings pierce the sandstone like doors into a mountain, yet some lead only a few meters into chambers created for the dead. The most striking examples rise roughly 50 meters above the surrounding ground, turning an ordinary burial into something deliberately visible, difficult to reach, and permanently separated from the world below. The ruins were known locally long before systematic archaeological investigation began to reconstruct their history, but modern surveys and excavations have revealed Dadan as the capital of two successive North Arabian kingdoms, Dadan and Lihyan, which dominated this oasis during much of the 1st millennium BCE. Archaeologists working in Alula have documented inscriptions, temples, settlements, sculptures, and extensive cemeteries cut directly into the sandstone cliffs. Among them are the famous lion tombs, generally associated with the Lihyanite period and dated to around the 5th century BCE. Their entrances appear monumental from a distance, although some chambers behind them extend only about 2 meters into the rock. That contrast is important. These were not gateways designed to provide continuing access to a complex hidden inside the mountain. Their primary purpose was funerary. A body could be placed beyond the opening, the burial completed, and the entrance effectively ceased to function as a normal door. Yet the builders invested considerable labor in positioning some of these tombs far above the valley floor, where carving them required far more effort than cutting equivalent chambers near ground level. The mountain itself therefore appears to have been part of the message. The higher openings remained visible from the inhabited landscape, creating a permanent architectural presence for people who were no longer alive. This raises the most difficult question surrounding the tombs. Who exactly deserved such treatment? Archaeologists can identify broad cultural phases and read some of the inscriptions preserved around Dadan, but the identities of many individuals buried behind these openings remain uncertain. The lion tombs are particularly revealing. Two entrances are accompanied by carved lions, powerful animals that transform otherwise simple rectangular openings into unmistakable monuments. Their style has been compared with artistic traditions farther east, including Mesopotamian influences, demonstrating that Dadan belonged to a much larger cultural network. Yet even here, the monument tells us more about status than identity. The tombs may have belonged to governors, wealthy officials, merchants, or other members of an elite, but assigning specific social positions to their occupants remains difficult. That uncertainty becomes more intriguing because Dadan was not an isolated desert settlement. The oasis stood on one of the great commercial corridors of ancient Arabia, linking the incense-producing regions of the south with markets farther north. Frankincense, aromatics, and other valuable commodities moved through this landscape, bringing travelers and communities from distant regions into contact with local rulers. Inscriptions found around Alula preserve several linguistic traditions, including Dadanitic, Minaic, and Aramaic, evidence of a population connected to territories far beyond the oasis. One inscription associated with a lion tomb indicates that its occupant belonged to the Manayan community, whose homeland lay hundreds of kilometers to the south in what is now Yemen. A person from outside Dadan could therefore receive one of the most visually distinctive burials on the cliff. That single detail complicates any simple explanation that the highest or most elaborate doors belonged exclusively to Dadanite or Lyhianite royalty. Wealth, political authority, commercial importance, family connections and foreign status may all have influenced burial privilege, but the hierarchy has not been reconstructed with certainty. If the height of a tomb reflected rank, archaeologists still cannot reliably translate elevation into a specific title. If the lions represented authority, protection, ancestry, or religious symbolism, their exact meaning in this funerary setting remains debated. The monuments communicate that certain dead individuals mattered, while withholding much of the information required to explain why. The physical arrangement deepens the problem. Cutting a chamber approximately 50 meters above the ground demanded planning, access, and organized labor. Workers had to reach the cliff face safely, remove sandstone, shape an entrance, and hollow out the burial space behind it. The stone removed during the creation of tombs was not necessarily wasted. Archaeological interpretation of Dadan indicates that quarried material from the necropolis could be reused in construction within the settlement. The city of the living and the mountain of the dead were therefore materially connected. Every chamber represented both an absence carved into the cliff and a supply of stone that could return to the inhabited landscape below. Yet the chambers themselves often resist expectations created by their imposing setting. From the valley, a dark rectangular opening high in the rock can resemble the entrance to a deep underground system. Instead, the interior may be remarkably limited. The effort was concentrated not on constructing enormous hidden corridors, but on creating a controlled burial space and giving its entrance a commanding position within the landscape. This suggests that visibility mattered at least as much as internal scale. The door was the point where two domains met, and once burial rituals ended, ordinary movement through that threshold was no longer necessary. The missing names behind many of these doors are especially significant because the political history surrounding them is itself incomplete. Dadan was eventually followed by the Kingdom of Liyan, but archaeologists continue to investigate exactly how that transition occurred, how closely the two populations were related, and how political authority changed over time. The chronology has become clearer through inscriptions and excavation, yet major gaps remain. Even the eventual decline of Lihian cannot be reduced confidently to a single cause. Shifting trade networks, regional political competition, and the growing influence of the Nabateans all belong to the historical environment, but the surviving evidence does not provide a simple narrative of collapse. This uncertainty makes the tombs unusually valuable. Their differences in elevation, carving, inscriptions, and decoration may preserve fragments of a social structure that written records have not fully recovered. A plain opening could represent an entirely different level of status from an entrance guarded by lions, while neighboring tombs might belong to people separated by origin, profession, or political rank. Without inscriptions identifying every occupant, however, archaeologists cannot simply read the cliff like a list of names. The architecture survives more completely than the biographies. The lions make this contradiction visible. Carved beside the entrances, they appear to guard people whose precise identities have largely disappeared. Their presence required additional skill and labor, strongly implying that the occupants possessed unusual importance, yet the reason for that importance is difficult to recover more than 2,000 years later. They may have been administrators controlling a wealthy oasis, prominent merchants connected to the incense trade, members of powerful families, or individuals whose religious or political roles are no longer preserved in surviving texts. Archaeology can measure the chamber, study tool marks, analyze inscriptions, and compare artistic styles, but those methods cannot automatically restore a lost social identity.
Hidden deep within the arid expanse of northwestern Arabia, the ancient oasis of Al-Ula emerges not merely as a survival point in the desert, but as a sophisticated, long-lasting experiment in environmental engineering, material science, and architectural resilience, one that continues to puzzle archaeologists and engineers alike. Over the last several decades, systematic surveys and excavations led by the Royal Commission for Al-Ula, alongside international archaeological missions, have revealed that this region sustained continuous human occupation for more than 6,000 to 7,000 years, with significant urban development flourishing during the eras of the Dadan and the Lyhian Kingdom around the 1st millennium BCE. Yet beyond its impressive antiquity, and what makes Al-Ula truly extraordinary is the silent evidence of a technological system, particularly in architecture, that appears far more advanced than what conventional historical narratives would suggest. At the core of this mystery lies the architecture of earth and stone, a domain where Al-Ula seems to defy both expectation and replication. Unlike monumental civilizations that relied heavily on carved granite or marble, the builders of Al-Ula worked primarily with mud brick and sandstone, materials typically associated with impermanence. And yet, paradoxically, many of these structures have endured for over 1,500 years, with some foundational elements possibly dating even further back. This endurance becomes even more astonishing when one considers the environmental conditions. Extreme thermal fluctuations that can exceed 40 degrees Celsius between day and night, seasonal flash floods capable of eroding entire landscapes, and constant wind-driven sand abrasion acting as a natural sandblasting force over centuries. In comparison, Other ancient mud brick cities, such as Mohenjo-Daro of the Indus Valley Civilization, dating to around 2500 BCE, have required continuous conservation efforts to prevent deterioration caused by salinization and erosion. Even then, large portions have degraded significantly over time. Similarly, mud brick settlements across the Sahara or Arabian interior often collapse within a few centuries if left unmaintained. Yet in Al-Ula, entire wall segments, alleyways, and structural outlines remain visible and, in some cases, surprisingly intact despite long periods of abandonment. This anomaly has led researchers to question whether the apparent simplicity of mud brick construction here conceals a far more advanced understanding of material composition and structural behavior. Recent material analyses suggest that Al-Ula's builders may have employed layered composite techniques rather than uniform brick mixtures. Instead of relying solely on clay and water, they appear to have incorporated sand of varying grain sizes, organic fibers such as plant matter, and possibly mineral stabilizers to enhance tensile strength and resistance to cracking. This multi-component approach would have allowed the bricks to behave more like flexible composites, capable of absorbing stress caused by thermal expansion and contraction, a concept remarkably similar to principles used in modern engineered materials. However, despite controlled laboratory experiments attempting to reproduce these mixtures, researchers have yet to fully replicate the durability observed in the original structures, suggesting that subtle variables, perhaps related to local soil chemistry or preparation methods, remain unknown. Equally compelling is the integration of stone architecture, particularly in more prominent or strategically important structures. Sandstone blocks, sourced locally, were cut and assembled with a level of precision that challenges assumptions about the tools available at the time. While not as visually monumental as the rock-cut facades of Petra, there the craftsmanship reveals a comparable understanding of load distribution, joint stability, and long-term erosion resistance. In some cases, the joints between stones are so finely aligned that mortar appears minimal or entirely absent, a technique reminiscent, though less elaborate, of the dry stone masonry seen in Machu Picchu, where interlocking blocks have withstood seismic activity for centuries. The question arises, how did a desert-based society, with no known access to advanced metal tools or written engineering manuals, achieve such precision? Beyond the materials themselves, the architectural design of Al-Ula demonstrates an intricate relationship with environmental physics. Settlements were densely clustered, with narrow passageways and high walls designed to maximize shade and channel airflow. This configuration creates a passive cooling system capable of reducing ambient temperatures by an estimated 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, a level of efficiency comparable to modern sustainable urban design. The orientation of buildings appears to have been carefully calibrated to minimize solar exposure during peak heat, while capturing prevailing winds, suggesting a deep empirical, or perhaps even theoretical, understanding of microclimatic dynamics. Such integration of architecture with environmental control further reinforces the idea that these were not ad hoc constructions, but the result of a refined and possibly standardized knowledge system. Excavations carried out between 2018 and 2023 have added yet another layer of complexity. Beneath visible ruins, archaeologists uncovered multiple construction phases, indicating that structures were repeatedly modified, reinforced, and rebuilt over centuries. This pattern implies not only long-term occupation, but also the existence of a continuity of technical knowledge, likely transmitted through generations without reliance on written documentation. Unlike ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, where architectural practices were sometimes recorded in texts or inscriptions, Al-Ula offers almost no direct written explanation of its construction methods. This absence transforms each surviving wall and foundation into a kind of silent record, one that must be interpreted through physical evidence alone. Comparative studies with other desert regions deepen the enigma. In North African Khazars, for instance, similar mud brick techniques are still used today, but require constant maintenance to prevent structural failure. In contrast, many allular structures have remained recognizable after centuries of neglect, suggesting either superior initial construction or uniquely favorable preservation conditions, or perhaps a combination of both. Some researchers propose that the oasis environment itself created a microclimate that slowed degradation, balancing humidity, temperature, and airflow in a way that preserved materials more effectively. However, this hypothesis does not fully explain why certain structures are significantly more resilient than others, even within the same environment. Ultimately, Al-Ula Ancient Oasis challenges our understanding of advanced technology. With no machines or written plans, its builders still mastered water control, environmental adaptation, and durable construction in ways modern science cannot fully explain. In the silence of the desert, Al-Ula endures, not as ruins of a simple past, but as evidence of a sophisticated knowledge system that has yet to be fully rediscovered. If you could travel back in time to the era of Al-Ula Ancient Oasis, what do you think would surprise you the most? Their construction techniques, their environmental management, or the knowledge they never recorded? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden deep within a narrow jungle valley in central Vietnam lies one of Southeast Asia's most perplexing archaeological sites, My Son Sanctuary. Built between approximately the 4th and 13th centuries by the ancient Champa civilization, this sacred complex once contained more than 70 Hindu temples dedicated primarily to the god Shiva. Today, although many structures were damaged during wars and centuries of tropical weathering, the surviving brick towers still stand as silent evidence of an engineering tradition that researchers continue to struggle to fully explain. What makes My Son especially fascinating is not merely its religious significance, but the extraordinary construction technology embedded in its red brick temples, technology that appears surprisingly sophisticated for a civilization that flourished more than 1,000 years ago. Among the many mysteries surrounding the sanctuary, the most debated and scientifically puzzling feature is the unusual method by which the bricks were joined together. Unlike most ancient masonry structures around the world, the bricks at My Son appear to be assembled with almost no visible mortar at all. At first glance, the towers of My Son seem to be built from ordinary rectangular bricks, similar to those used in many ancient structures across Asia. However, closer inspection reveals something highly unusual. The bricks are fitted together with such precision that the joints between them are nearly invisible. In many places, the gap between bricks measures less than a fraction of a millimeter, far tighter than the joints typically found in traditional brick architecture. Even more remarkable is the fact that researchers have struggled to identify any conventional binding material between the bricks. In most ancient buildings, such as Roman brick structures or medieval temples in India, layers of lime mortar or clay mortar clearly separate each brick. At My Son, however, the bricks appear fused together almost as if they were part of a single continuous block. When archaeologists attempted to separate bricks from collapsed towers during restoration efforts, they discovered that breaking the bricks themselves was often easier than separating the joints between them. This observation alone has raised profound questions about how the Champa builders achieved such a level of precision and durability. Scientific studies conducted during restoration projects in the 20th and 21st centuries have attempted to uncover the secret of this technique. One of the earliest systematic investigations occurred during the French archaeological missions of the early 1900s, when researchers from the École Française d'Extrême-Orient first documented the structure of the temples. They noted that the surfaces of the bricks appeared unusually smooth, almost polished, suggesting that the bricks may have been carefully ground before assembly. Later, microscopic analysis revealed that the outer surfaces of the bricks contain extremely fine mineral particles, indicating that they were manufactured using a carefully controlled clay mixture. Modern tests estimate that the bricks were fired at temperatures between approximately 800 and 900 degrees Celsius, comparable to advanced kiln techniques used in many historical civilizations. Yet despite these findings, one key question remains unresolved. How are these bricks bonded together so tightly without visible mortar? Several theories have been proposed to explain this phenomenon, but none have been universally accepted. One hypothesis suggests that the Champa builders constructed the towers first and then fired the entire structure in place, effectively turning the whole building into a giant kiln-fired ceramic structure. If true, this would mean that the heat caused the bricks to partially fuse together, eliminating the need for mortar. However, many engineers argue that heating a multi-story tower evenly to such high temperatures without causing structural collapse would have been extremely difficult, especially with ancient technology. Another theory proposes that a natural organic resin derived from tropical plants may have been used as a binding agent. Some chemical analyses have detected traces of plant-based compounds on the surfaces of certain bricks, leading researchers to speculate that the Champa civilization may have used a sophisticated adhesive mixture made from tree resins, oils, or sap. Yet attempts to recreate such mixtures in laboratory experiments have so far failed to replicate the exact bonding strength observed in the original structures. The mystery becomes even more intriguing when my son is compared with other ancient architectural achievements around the world. For example, the massive stone blocks of Machu Picchu are famously fitted together with extraordinary precision, but those structures rely on carefully carved stone rather than brick. In ancient Rome, brick structures were widespread, yet they always depended on thick layers of lime mortar for stability. Even in the monumental temples of Angkor, sandstone blocks were often joined with visible joints or metal clamps. My son stands apart because it combines the flexibility of brick construction with a level of precision more commonly associated with finely cut stone masonry. This unusual combination suggests that the Champa builders possessed a highly specialized construction technique that has not been fully preserved in historical records. Archaeological excavations have also revealed that the bricks themselves were manufactured with unusual characteristics. Compared to modern industrial bricks, the bricks at my son are noticeably lighter and more porous. This porosity may have helped regulate moisture within the structure, preventing cracks in the humid tropical climate of central Vietnam. Researchers studying samples from fallen towers have observed that the bricks contain microscopic air pockets that improve thermal stability and reduce stress during temperature changes. In addition, the outer surfaces of many bricks appear to have been treated with a protective layer that gives them their distinctive reddish sheen. Some scientists believe that this coating may have been applied after construction, possibly using a plant-based oil or resin that sealed the joints and protected the bricks from erosion. Another fascinating aspect of the construction process is the order in which decorative carvings were created. Unlike many ancient monuments where decorations were carved into individual stones before assembly, many of the sculptural details at my son appear to have been carved directly into the walls after the towers were completed. This would have required artisans to work on perfectly aligned brick surfaces without damaging the delicate structural joints between them. Why, the carvings depict mythological figures from Hindu cosmology, including representations of Shiva, sacred animals, and celestial dancers. The precision of these carvings suggests that the craftsmen possess specialized metal tools capable of shaping fired brick without causing fractures. Despite decades of research, the original building techniques used by the Champa civilization remain only partially understood. Modern restoration teams working to preserve my son have repeatedly attempted to recreate the ancient construction methods, yet reproducing the seamless brick joints has proven extremely difficult. Even when modern bricks are carefully manufactured and assembled using contemporary adhesives, the results rarely achieve the same level of durability or visual integration seen in the original structures. This persistent gap between ancient craftsmanship and modern reconstruction highlights just how advanced the Champa builders may have been. What do you think is the real secret behind the perfectly fitted bricks without mortar at my son's sanctuary? Could it be a lost ancient adhesive, a unique firing technique, or a construction technology that we still don't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden within the remote sandstone massif of Gilf Kabir in southwestern Egypt, the mysterious Cave of Swimmers remains one of the most intellectually challenging archaeological sites ever discovered in the Sahara. First documented in 1933 by Hungarian explorer Laszlo Almasi, the cave is renowned for its haunting depictions of human figures that appear to float or swim across the rock surface, imagery that strongly implies the existence of water in a region that is now among the driest places on Earth. Radiocarbon dating of associated organic materials and stylistic comparisons place these paintings roughly between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, aligning them with the African humid period, when the Sahara supported lakes, seasonal rivers, and savanna ecosystems. Yet while the environmental implications of the artwork are significant, the most profound and unresolved mystery lies not in what the cave depicts, but in how those depictions have survived with such extraordinary clarity for millennia, defying both time and one of the harshest climates on the planet. Multiple archaeological expeditions, particularly those led by German, Italian, and Egyptian teams during the 1990s and early 2000s, have undertaken detailed pigment analysis using techniques such as X-ray fluorescence, XRF, Raman spectroscopy, and microscopic stratigraphy. These studies reveal that the pigments are primarily derived from iron oxide minerals, including hematite and ochre, which produce the dominant red and brown tones visible today. In some darker outlines, traces of manganese compounds have also been identified. On a purely compositional level, this does not appear unusual. Similar mineral pigments were widely used across prehistoric sites, including Lascaux Cave in France and Altamira Cave in Spain. However, it is precisely this similarity that deepens the mystery. If the raw materials are comparable, why is the preservation in the Cave of Swimmers so exceptionally superior under far more extreme environmental conditions? To understand the anomaly, one must consider the environmental context. The Gilf Kabir Plateau experiences daytime temperatures that can exceed 45 to 50 degrees Celsius, with rapid nocturnal cooling that creates continuous thermal stress on exposed surfaces. In addition, the region is subject to persistent aeolian erosion, where wind-driven sand acts as a natural abrasive, gradually wearing away exposed rock and any material on its surface. In such conditions, modern paints, even those engineered for durability, would typically show significant degradation within decades or centuries, not millennia. Yet in the Cave of Swimmers, many figures remain sharply defined, with pigment layers that have neither fully flaked away nor faded into obscurity. Some outlines retain a level of contrast that suggests minimal chemical breakdown, raising a critical question. What binding agents or application techniques were used to achieve such resilience? Conventional archaeological assumptions propose that prehistoric artists mixed mineral pigments with organic binders such as animal fat, blood, plant gum, or egg-based emulsions. These substances can indeed improve adhesion and color intensity, but they are also highly susceptible to degradation through oxidation, microbial activity, and UV exposure. Experimental archaeology has attempted to recreate such mixtures under controlled conditions, subjecting them to accelerated weathering simulations. The results consistently show that while these reconstructions can survive for limited periods, they fail to replicate the long-term stability observed in the Yilfkebir paintings, especially under conditions approximating Sahara-level heat and abrasion. This discrepancy suggests that either the original formulations were more complex than currently assumed, or that additional unknown processes were involved. One of the most compelling hypotheses emerging from microscopic analysis is that the pigments may not simply rest on the rock surface, but are partially integrated into the sandstone matrix itself. Thin section studies of the cave walls indicate that, in certain areas, pigment particles appear to have penetrated the porous structure of the rock, forming a bond that is both mechanical and potentially chemical. This raises the possibility that prehistoric artists deliberately prepared the surface, perhaps by abrading it to increase porosity, heating it to alter its microstructure, or even applying a liquid medium that facilitated deeper absorption. If true, this would represent a level of material manipulation that borders on proto-engineering, far exceeding the commonly held view of prehistoric art as purely intuitive or symbolic. Comparative analysis with other Saharan sites reinforces the uniqueness of the Cave of Swimmers. In regions such as Tassili Naja in Algeria or the Anidi Plateau in Chad, rock art also exhibits impressive longevity, but often shows more pronounced fading, surface flaking, or pigment loss. By contrast, certain panels within the Cave of Swimmers display remarkable uniformity in pigment retention, suggesting a consistent and possibly standardized technique. This consistency implies not only repeated practice, but also the transmission of specialized knowledge, whether through cultural tradition or a dedicated group of artisans whose methods have since been lost. Another unresolved aspect concerns the chemical stability of the pigments themselves over extreme timescales. Iron oxides are known for their durability, but even they can undergo alteration under prolonged exposure to environmental stressors. The fact that these pigments have remained stable for up to 10,000 years suggests that either the microenvironment of the cave provides unique protective conditions, or that the pigment mixture includes trace elements or structural properties that inhibit degradation. Some researchers have speculated about the presence of naturally occurring silica or clay components that may act as stabilizers, effectively locking the pigment in place. However, no definitive composition has been identified that fully accounts for the observed preservation. The broader implication of this mystery extends beyond the cave itself. If prehistoric communities in the Sahara were capable of developing pigment technologies with such exceptional durability, it challenges the linear model of technological progress that places advanced material science firmly within the domain of later civilizations. Instead, it suggests the possibility of localized knowledge systems, highly adapted to specific environments, that achieved remarkable results without leaving behind extensive physical evidence of their processes. As the Sahara underwent rapid desertification after approximately 5,500 years ago, many of these communities likely migrated or disappeared, potentially taking their knowledge with them and leaving only the finished products as silent testimony. The Cave of Swimmers is more than a record of a lost green Sahara. It is a technological artifact in pigment and stone that modern science still cannot fully explain. Despite decades of research, no experiment has replicated its durability or clarity. The figures may reflect memory or symbolism, but the pigments reveal something deeper: lost techniques and unexplained material knowledge. So the question remains, how did a prehistoric society create paint that could survive for 10 millennia in such an extreme environment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. On the remote windswept island of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, standing against the Atlantic sky for more than 5,000 years, lies one of the most mysterious prehistoric monuments in Europe, the Callanish Stones. Long before the pyramids of Giza reached their final form, and centuries before the famous stone circle of Stonehenge began to rise in southern England, the people of this distant island erected a complex arrangement of towering megaliths that continues to challenge archaeologists, astronomers, and engineers today. The site was first systematically documented in the 19th century, when Scottish antiquarians began recording the arrangement of the stones and collecting local traditions surrounding them. Later excavations in 1857, 1914, and most importantly during the 1980 to 1981 archaeological investigations led by Patrick Ashmore, revealed that the monument dates to roughly 3000 to 2900 BCE, placing it firmly in the late Neolithic period. Beneath the central circle, archaeologists discovered the remains of an earlier ritual chamber tomb, suggesting that the site evolved over centuries into a monumental ceremonial complex. Yet even after more than a century of research, Callanish continues to present a puzzle. How did a prehistoric community with no metal tools, no written language, and no advanced instruments design such a precise and astronomically aligned structure? The monument itself is far more complex than a simple stone circle. At its heart stands a ring of 13 large stones, each surrounding a towering central monolith that rises nearly 4.8 meters, about 16 feet, above the ground. Extending outward from this circle are 4 long rows of stones, forming a distinctive cross-shaped layout stretching across the landscape. In total, roughly 50 standing stones compose the main structure, each carved from Lewisian gneiss, an incredibly ancient and hard rock formation, estimated to be over 3 billion years old. Individual stones weigh between 5 and 7 tons, and some exceed 5 meters in height. For a society without wheeled vehicles or iron tools, transporting and erecting these stones would have required extraordinary effort. Archaeologists believe the stones were quarried several kilometers away and then moved across rough, then boggy terrain using wooden sledges or rollers made from tree trunks. However, no definitive archaeological evidence confirming the exact method has been found. Even modern experimental archaeology suggests that moving such stones would have required large coordinated groups and precise planning, raising questions about the social organization and engineering knowledge of the Neolithic community that built the monument. Yet the most fascinating mystery of Callanish lies not in the stones themselves, but in the remarkably sophisticated astronomical alignment embedded in the structure. Unlike many prehistoric monuments that primarily track the movement of the sun, such as Stonehenge's famous alignment with the summer solstice sunrise, Callanish appears to be oriented toward the far more complex motions of the moon. Researchers studying the site in the 20th century began to notice something extraordinary. When viewed along the main avenue of stones leading into the circle, the surrounding hills and the horizon create a natural frame for the rising and setting moon. This led astronomers such as Alexander Thom, a Scottish engineer who studied megalithic sites in the 1960s, to propose that Callanish may have been designed to track a rare astronomical event known as the Major Lunar Standstill. The moon does not follow the same path across the sky every year. Instead, over a cycle of approximately 18.6 years, the moon's rising and setting positions gradually shift to their northernmost and southernmost extremes before returning again. During these rare moments, known as the Major Lunar Standstill, the moon appears to skim dramatically along the horizon, rising or setting at points far beyond its normal range. What makes Callanish astonishing is that its stones appear to be arranged to mark this exact phenomenon. When the lunar standstill occurs, the moon seems to roll along the distant hills before entering the central stone circle, creating a visual effect that some researchers describe as a lunar procession. The alignment is so striking that observers standing within the monument can watch the moon travel along the stone avenue and settle precisely within the center of the circle. This phenomenon only occurs once every 18.6 years, meaning that the builders of Callanish would have needed to observe the moon's movements for many generations to recognize the pattern. Unlike solar cycles, which repeat annually and are relatively easy to track, lunar standstill cycles require extremely long-term observation and precise knowledge of the horizon. For comparison, even sophisticated civilizations such as the Babylonians and Greeks, who recorded astronomical observations in written form thousands of years later, needed careful calculations to fully understand the lunar cycle. How, then, did Neolithic builders in a remote corner of Scotland detect such a complex celestial pattern? Archaeologists have suggested that the builders may have been part of a culture deeply focused on long-term skywatching, passing knowledge orally across generations. Others believe the monument itself may have served as a kind of prehistoric astronomical instrument, allowing observers to track the moon's movement against fixed stone markers. But the precision of the alignments remains remarkable. Studies conducted in the late 20th and early 21st centuries confirmed that several rows of stones point towards specific lunar rising and setting, positions associated with the standstill cycle. The long northern avenue, consisting of 19 stones stretching about 80 meters, appears to guide the viewer's eye toward a distant notch in the hills where the moon would rise during the standstill event. When this occurs, the moon seems to glide across the horizon before aligning with the central monolith, an effect that must have been both visually dramatic and spiritually significant for the ancient people who gathered here. The surrounding landscape adds yet another layer of complexity. The site is positioned within a natural basin of hills that shape the horizon in distinctive ways. Archaeologists believe the builders intentionally selected this location because the contours of the land enhanced the lunar alignment, allowing the moon to interact visually with the stones and the hills beyond. In other words, the monument appears to combine architecture, astronomy, and landscape design into a single integrated system. Excavations also reveal that Callanish was not an isolated monument. Within several kilometers lie multiple related stone settings, known today as Callanish 2, 3, and 4, along with smaller standing stones and burial features scattered across the landscape. These structures may have formed a wider ceremonial complex, suggesting that the island once hosted a vibrant ritual center, where communities gathered for astronomical observations and ceremonies linked to the cycles of the sky. Local folklore preserves echoes of this ancient significance. According to traditional legends from the Isle of Lewis, the stones were once giants who refused to convert to Christianity and were turned into stone as punishment. Another story claims the stones are ancient beings who rise and walk when the moon is high in the sky. While these tales emerged thousands of years after the monument was built, they reflect a long-standing sense that the stones are somehow connected to cosmic forces and ancient rituals. More than 5,000 years after their construction, the Callanish stones still stand against the Atlantic winds, aligned with the moon and marking a rare cycle that appears only once every 18.5 years. Whether the site was a temple, a lunar observatory, or a ceremonial gathering place remains unknown. What is certain is that its builders possessed remarkable knowledge of the sky. knowledge that even modern research has not fully explained. What do you think the Callanish stones truly were? An ancient lunar observatory, a sacred ceremonial centre, or evidence that ancient people understood astronomy far better than we assume? Where are you watching this video from? And what time of day is it for you? Share your location and time in the comments below. Amid the valley surrounded by the ancient marshes of Campeche, the five-story palace, the Edznar five-story palace, rises as a monumental testament to the complexity and mystery of the Maya civilization. This structure, located within the Edznar archaeological site, has long astonished archaeologists not only because of its unique form and rare multi-level architecture, but also due to layers of advanced knowledge embedded into every stone block, every staircase, and every intentionally designed space. From afar, the palace appears like a hybrid between a pyramid and a multi-tiered royal residence. But upon closer observation, one realizes it surpasses all conventional Maya architectural models. It is not perfectly symmetrical, not strictly repetitive, and seems to reflect a design philosophy that modern humanity still fails to fully comprehend. The upper tiers are stacked with deliberate precision, creating a structure that is simultaneously ceremonial, authoritative, and observatory in nature, closely linked with the movement of the sun and celestial phenomena. This multi-layered identity has made the Edznar five-story palace an unsolved mystery throughout the centuries. Do you believe the Maya possessed technical knowledge far beyond what we know today? In your opinion, what could have enabled them to build such a monumental and precise structure? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Beneath the structure, archaeologists discovered drainage systems so sophisticated that one might assume this was a city from a much later historical era. Underground canals, reservoir, drainage routes, wells, and waterproof foundation layers reveal that Edznar was one of the most hydraulically advanced Maya centers. The inhabitants clearly understood their unstable environment well, and the placement of the five-story palace at the heart of all these systems was no coincidence. It was protected from water while simultaneously functioning as a natural measuring device for determining seasons, weather cycles, and ceremonial timing. For this reason, no one truly knows whether the building was a palace, a temple, an astronomical observatory, or a combination of all three. Its interior rooms also offer no definitive answers. Some chambers have small doors, some have mysterious entrances, and some have no openings at all. These sealed rooms have sparked endless debate among researchers. Were they ritual storage rooms, prison cells, private ceremonial chambers, or simply older spaces swallowed by later construction phases? No hypothesis fully captures the strangeness of these rooms, and the silence within them only deepens the mystery of the palace. Another striking aspect is the mixture of several Maya architectural traditions within one single structure. The five-story palace embodies Puuc characteristics with its straight, smooth stone facades, Peten influence with its steep pyramid-like tiers, and Chene style expressed in decorated doorways and geometric motifs. This unusual blend has led scholars to believe that Edznar must have been far more than a regional settlement. It was likely a significant cultural crossroads where builders and artisans from various Maya regions converged. The architects here clearly possessed knowledge extending beyond local boundaries, applying it to create a structure unlike anything else in the Maya world. It stands as an architectural manifesto, a declaration of power, and perhaps also a multifunctional structure meant to endure for centuries, even after its inhabitants abandoned the city. Then came the most perplexing event. Around the year 1500, the population of Edznar vanished. There were no signs of war, no large-scale destruction, and no clear evidence of societal collapse. The city was left nearly intact, as if its people departed in complete silence. This peculiar abandonment further elevates the five-story palace as a symbol of mystery, a massive structure left behind without guardians or explanations. Archaeologists have proposed numerous theories: environmental change, water scarcity, disease, ritual instability, political restructuring, yet none fully aligns with the available evidence. Edsna seems to have fallen into a historical void, and its five-story palace now stands as a remnant of a world we understand only faintly. However, the greatest mystery, and the most strongly emphasized point, lies in the astonishing construction precision that far exceeded the tools available to the Maya at that time. This is what makes the five-story palace nearly confrontational to modern engineering. The Maya of Edsna had no hard metals to finely cut stone, no wheels, no beasts of burden, no advanced pulley systems, and no cement-like mortar. Yet they erected a multi-tiered structure with stone blocks cut in perfectly straight lines, fitted so tightly that some joints are said to be no wider than a strand of hair. Walls several meters high remain perfectly upright after millennia, showing no signs of tilting or drift, something many modern buildings cannot achieve without reinforced steel. Long, steep staircases retain sharp geometric edges, revealing sophisticated soil compaction and foundational engineering far beyond what simple stone tools should permit. The upper tiers, which required even more demanding load management, were constructed with astonishing accuracy, prompting archaeologists to ask, how did they lift such massive stones without machinery? Multi-leveled scaffolds? Lever systems? Or perhaps an entirely lost technique never recorded in surviving archaeology? Modern experiments attempting to replicate Maya building methods consistently fail to achieve the same level of flatness, tightness, and structural balance seen in the palace. Some scholars propose that the Maya possessed highly advanced surveying knowledge using sunlight, shadow, or astronomical principles to determine perfect alignment. Others believe that their stone cutting and fitting techniques were far more advanced than what archaeological remains currently reveal, implying that much of their knowledge disappeared when Edsna was abandoned. The truth is unmistakable. This level of precision cannot be explained solely through manpower and primitive stone tools. It suggests extraordinary labor organization, sophisticated engineering management, and a lost architectural tradition. Thus, the phrase construction precision beyond the tools of the time is not merely an archaeological note. It is the very heart of the Edsna mystery, the single greatest reason the palace persists as an intellectual challenge. Yet the palace's mystery does not reside only in its stones, but also in the silence of history itself, the abandoned city, the vanished knowledge, the sealed chambers, the solar-aligned doorways with no worshippers left to observe them, all contribute to the impression that this was a structure built for purposes far beyond daily life. No, it feels like a sacred marker, a cosmic instrument, a declaration of authority, a bridge between the human world and the celestial one, or even an abstract map of Maya cosmology. When its people departed, the palace remained, a quiet witness to the disappearance of knowledge. Today, as one stands before the Edsna five-story palace, one does not merely see an architectural structure. One confronts a profound gap in humanity's understanding. Its advanced precision does more than astonish. It compels us to ask, did the ancient Maya achieve a level of engineering that modern history has never properly acknowledged? Did their highly refined knowledge vanish with the collapse of Edsna, leaving behind only silent stones, yet stones too perfect to ignore? And more importantly, if a civilization without hard metals, wheels, or pulleys could construct such a masterpiece, how many other secrets of theirs remain undiscovered? Buried within the vast sandstone plateau of Tassili Naja, Sefer City emerges not as a conventional archaeological site, but as a sprawling, almost surreal landscape that challenges the limits of how we define both nature and technology in deep antiquity. Stretching across tens of square kilometers, this immense formation of eroded rock towers, narrow corridors and cavern-like voids has often been described by explorers and researchers as a stone city, not merely because of its scale, but due to the uncanny resemblance of its structures to organized urban space, multi-level forms that evoke buildings, alleyways, plazas, and passage systems. Yet despite these striking similarities, Sephar lacks the unmistakable indicators of human construction. No consistent tool marks, no quarries, no discarded fragments of worked stone. The dominant scientific explanation attributes these forms to long-term aeolian erosion, wind-driven processes acting over millions of years, yet even within this framework, certain aspects remain difficult to reconcile, particularly the recurring sense of spatial order and the quasi-architectural coherence observed across large sections of the site. Still, while the geological formations provoke curiosity, the deeper and far more perplexing mystery lies etched and painted across the surfaces of these stones, an immense body of prehistoric imagery that may represent one of the oldest and most durable information systems ever created by human hands. Within the broader Tassili Naja complex, researchers have catalogued over 15,000 individual rock paintings and engravings, with a significant concentration around Sephar. These artworks span a vast chronological range from approximately 10,000 BCE to 2000 BCE, corresponding to the African humid period when the Sahara was not the barren desert we see today, but a landscape of lakes, rivers, and thriving ecosystems. Early systematic study of the region was conducted by Henri Lot during expeditions in the 1950s, during which hundreds of paintings were documented, sketched, and photographed. His work brought international attention to a category of imagery now widely known as the round head style. Figures characterized by disproportionately large, often featureless heads, and elongated, almost weightless bodies. Some appear to float, others interact in scenes that suggest ritual or transformation, and a subset exhibit shapes that resemble helmets or suits, leading to persistent, if controversial, comparisons with modern astronaut iconography. While mainstream archaeology interprets these as symbolic or shamanistic representations, possibly linked to altered states of consciousness, the repetition, distribution, and consistency of these figures across hundreds of kilometers introduce a deeper question. Could these images represent a structured system of communication rather than purely artistic expression? What makes this question particularly compelling is the extraordinary durability of the pigments themselves. The Sahara is one of the most hostile environments on Earth, the preservation of surface materials. Daily temperature variations can exceed 40 degrees Celsius, ultraviolet radiation is intense, and sand-laden winds act as a constant abrasive force. Under such conditions, most organic or mineral pigments would degrade within centuries, if not decades. Yet the Tassili paintings have survived for over 8,000 years, in many cases retaining not only their outlines, but subtle tonal variations and layering effects. Scientific analyses have identified the use of mineral-based pigments such as hematite, iron oxide for reds, manganese oxides for darker hues, and possible organic binders derived from plant or animal sources. However, attempts to replicate these pigments using known prehistoric techniques often fail to achieve the same level of long-term stability, especially under simulated desert conditions. This suggests that the original creators may have employed preparation methods, such as precise grinding, mixing ratios, or heat treatment, that are not yet fully understood. In contrast, even the highly advanced pigment technologies of ancient Egypt, which produced colours lasting millennia in tombs and temples, relied on relatively controlled, sheltered environments. The exposed survival of Tassili's pigments therefore represents a technical anomaly that remains unresolved. Equally significant is the method by which these images were applied and integrated into the landscape. Rather than treating rock surfaces as passive canvases, many of the artists appear to have selected specific natural features, curves, cracks, protrusions, and incorporated them into the composition, creating a subtle three-dimensional effect. This indicates not only artistic awareness, but a form of environmental encoding, where information is embedded into the physical structure of the terrain itself. In some cases, Maya engravings have been carved into hard sandstone with a depth and precision that imply sustained, controlled effort, using tools that have not been conclusively identified. When compared to famous Paleolithic sites such as Lascaux Cave or Chauvet Cave, the contrast is striking. Those European sites are enclosed, protected caves, where stable microclimates have aided preservation. Sefar, by contrast, is an open-air system exposed to extreme weathering, yet its visual records have endured longer in some cases than their sheltered counterparts. This inversion of expected preservation patterns raises the possibility that the materials and techniques used at Sefar were not only functional, but intentionally optimized for longevity. Beyond material science, yes, the conceptual structure of the imagery invites comparison with early forms of data storage and transmission. Many scenes at Sefar are not isolated figures but sequences, depicting hunting, ritual gatherings, and transformations, suggesting narrative continuity. Certain motifs recur with remarkable consistency across distant locations, particularly the round-head figures and specific animal forms. This repetition can be likened, in a modern analogy, to redundancy in digital storage systems, where critical information is encoded multiple times to ensure survival against corruption or loss. If we consider the possibility that these images functioned as a mnemonic or symbolic language, then their widespread distribution could represent an intentional strategy to preserve knowledge across both space and time. Or unlike linear writing systems such as cuneiform or hieroglyphics, which depend on sequential decoding, the Tassili imagery may operate on a more associative or symbolic level, closer perhaps to a visual database than to a written text. Yet despite decades of study, no definitive grammar, syntax, or phonetic correlation has been identified, leaving the language of Sefar fundamentally unreadable. Archaeological investigations throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries have added further layers of complexity. Techniques such as radiocarbon dating of associated organic materials, stratigraphic analysis, and more recently high-resolution digital photogrammetry have revealed that many of the paintings exist in multiple overlapping layers. This indicates that the site was used continuously over thousands of years, with successive generations adding new images while preserving or partially modifying older ones. Such behavior resembles a form of long-term archival practice, where earlier records are not erased but integrated into an evolving system. In modern terms, it is akin to a database that is continuously updated while retaining legacy data, a concept that requires not only cultural continuity, but an understanding of the value of information preservation. The question then becomes, what information was considered important enough to be maintained in this way, across millennia, in one of the most challenging environments on Earth? Do you think the paintings at Sefar are simply ancient art, or could they actually be a lost form of information storage technology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden deep within the remote expanse of the Sahara Desert, in southeastern Algeria, the Tadrat Rouge rock formations rise like a silent archive of a forgotten world. Their crimson sandstone towers and arches shaped into forms so refined that they often blur the line between natural erosion and deliberate design. At first glance, the landscape appears to be the predictable outcome of geological forces: wind abrasion, thermal stress and sedimentary layering acting over millions of years. Yet the deeper one examines these formations, the more difficult it becomes to accept that randomness alone could produce such structural harmony. Some arches span more than 20 to 30 meters with remarkably consistent curvature, while vertical pillars maintain near uniform proportions along their height, suggesting a level of symmetry rarely sustained in environments subject to highly variable wind directions and shifting sand. Geological models acknowledge that differential erosion can produce arches and balanced rock formations, but they also emphasize irregularity as a defining characteristic. In Tadrat Rouge, however, certain formations appear almost stabilized in their geometry, as though shaped under conditions far more controlled than the modern Sahara can provide. Yet the true enigma of Tadrat Rouge is not carved by wind, but by human hands that lived thousands of years ago during the African humid period, when this now hostile desert was a fertile savanna filled with lakes, rivers, and large fauna. Across the rock surfaces, thousands of petroglyphs have been documented, with estimated ages ranging between 10,000 and 5,000 years before present. These engravings were first systematically recorded during early 20th century expeditions, particularly by French explorers in the 1930s, and later expanded through extensive surveys associated with UNESCO programs in the late 20th century, which aimed to catalogue and preserve the broader rock art heritage of the region. What these studies revealed was not merely the presence of ancient art, but a level of technical execution that continues to challenge modern assumptions about prehistoric capabilities. Unlike shallow or irregular markings typical of many early petroglyph sites, the engravings at Tadrat Rouge often display controlled incision depth, consistent line width, and sharply defined edges, even after millennia of exposure to one of the harshest environments on Earth. Many figures, depicting giraffes, elephants, cattle, and human forms, extend up to 1 meter in length, with anatomical proportions rendered in a way that suggests both observational accuracy and practice technique. Measurements taken from several panels indicate incision depths ranging from 2 to 6 millimeters, with minimal variation across individual figures, implying sustained control over force and angle during carving. Experimental archaeology has attempted to replicate such engravings using stone tools comparable to those available in the Stone Age, and the results are revealing. Producing a single deeply incised figure of comparable clarity can require anywhere from 5 to 20 hours of continuous labor, depending on the hardness of the sandstone and the desired precision. When multiplied across panels containing dozens of figures, the total labor investment becomes staggering, raising the question of whether efficiency techniques, now lost, were employed to accelerate the process. Even more puzzling is the durability of these carvings. The Sahara is not a passive environment, it is an active agent of erosion. Wind speeds in the region can exceed 50 kilometers per hour, carrying quartz-rich sand particles that function as natural abrasives, gradually wearing down exposed surfaces. Laboratory simulations suggest that fine details on sandstone should degrade significantly over a period of several thousand years under such conditions. Yet many Tadrat Rouge engravings retain crisp outlines and legible forms, despite being directly exposed for up to 10 millennia. This paradox has led researchers to explore the possibility of surface hardening phenomena. One hypothesis proposes that the rocks developed a protective patina through mineral deposition, such as iron oxides or silica, forming a thin, hardened layer that resists erosion. However, this does not fully explain why the carved lines, which initially would have disrupted this protective layer, remain so well preserved. In some cases, the engraved lines appear darker than the surrounding rock, suggesting differential weathering processes that may have, paradoxically, enhanced their visibility over time. comparative analysis with other world-famous rock art sites further highlights the anomaly. In Lascaux Cave, dated to around 17,000 years ago, the artwork survives largely because it is protected within cave interiors, shielded from environmental degradation. In contrast, the engravings of Tassili Naja, located within the same broader region, often show greater degrees of weathering and less uniform incision despite similar ages. The contrast suggests that either the artisans of Tadrat Rouge employed more advanced or consistent techniques, or that local environmental conditions uniquely favoured preservation in ways not yet fully understood. Even when compared to carved stone traditions in later civilizations, such as the rock-cut architecture of Petra, the Tadrat Rouge petroglyphs remain striking, not for their scale, but for their resilience and the mystery surrounding their creation. Archaeological investigations in the late 20th and early 21st centuries have incorporated modern technologies such as high-resolution photography, three-dimensional laser scanning, and micro-erosion analysis to better understand these engravings. Some studies suggest that certain carvings may have been re-engraved or deepened over generations, indicating a long-term cultural engagement with specific rock surfaces. This practice could partially explain the uniform depth observed in some figures, as repeated tracing would gradually refine and stabilize the lines. However, this explanation introduces its own questions. How were these traditions transmitted across generations, especially during a period when the environment was undergoing rapid transformation from a humid ecosystem to an arid desert between roughly 6000 and 3000 BCE? The continuity of style and technique implies a level of social and cognitive organization that is difficult to reconstruct from the limited archaeological record. The imagery itself adds another layer to the mystery. The presence of aquatic and savanna animals, crocodiles, hippos, giraffes, confirms that the region once supported abundant water and vegetation, aligning with paleoclimatic data derived from sediment cores and fossil evidence. Yet the artistic consistency across changing environmental conditions suggests that the creators of these petroglyphs were not merely recording their surroundings, but participating in a symbolic or ritual tradition with deeper meaning. Some figures appear stylized or abstracted, hinting at belief systems or narratives that remain undeciphered. Without written records, these carvings stand as the only testimony of a culture that may have possessed both artistic sophistication and practical knowledge exceeding what is typically attributed to prehistoric societies. In your opinion, what is the greatest mystery of Tadrat Rouge, the stone carving techniques, or the possibility that ancient technologies have been lost to history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden in the lush highlands of western Panama, near the fertile slopes of the Baru volcano, lies one of Central America's most enigmatic archaeological sites, Panama Sitio Barriles. Dating roughly from around 300 BCE to 600 CE, this mysterious ceremonial center belonged to a pre-Columbian culture in the Chiriquí region long before the arrival of Europeans. At first glance, Sitio Barriles may appear modest compared with monumental civilizations such as the Maya or the Inca. Yet the discoveries unearthed there during decades of excavation reveal a puzzling level of craftsmanship and symbolic complexity that continues to intrigue archaeologists. Among the most fascinating elements of the site are its unusual stone sculptures, ceremonial platforms, and carved monuments. However, the aspect that draws the greatest scientific attention is the remarkably precise stone carving technology used by its ancient inhabitants, technology that raises significant questions about the tools, methods, and knowledge available to a culture that supposedly relied mainly on stone implements. The site first attracted widespread academic interest during the 1940s, when local farmers clearing land in the Chiriquí Highlands began uncovering strange carved statues and petroglyphs embedded in the soil. These discoveries soon caught the attention of researchers, including archaeologists associated with the Smithsonian Institution, who initiated systematic investigations in the region. Subsequent excavations carried out during the 1950s and 1970s revealed that the area had once been a thriving ceremonial and residential complex. Archaeologists uncovered stone foundations, paved pathways, pottery fragments, tools, and, most strikingly, dozens of carved stone sculptures. Radiocarbon dating of associated organic materials suggested that the site was occupied for several centuries, beginning roughly around 300 BCE and continuing into the early centuries of the Common Era. This timeline places Sitio Bariles among the earliest complex cultural centers in the region. Yet what truly sets Sitio Bariles apart from other archaeological sites in Panama is the extraordinary craftsmanship of its carved stone artifacts. Many of these sculptures are carved from basalt and andesite, yet volcanic rocks known for their extreme hardness. Basalt, for example, typically measures around 6 on the Mohs hardness scale, making it significantly harder than limestone, the material commonly used by ancient civilizations such as the Maya for temple construction. Carving such rock with simple stone tools would have required immense effort and remarkable technical skill. Nevertheless, the artisans of Sitio Bariles managed to produce sculptures with smooth surfaces, balanced proportions, and detailed facial features, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of stoneworking techniques. Perhaps the most famous sculptures from the site are the so-called carrier statues, which depict a human figure carrying another person on its back. These statues, sometimes reaching heights of over 1.5 meters and weighing several hundred kilograms, display astonishingly detailed carvings. The faces often show expressive eyes, defined noses, and stylized mouths, while the bodies reveal carefully shaped limbs and belts. In several examples, the individual being carried appears smaller and more rigid, as if symbolizing a captive, ancestor, or spiritual entity. The precise symbolism of these sculptures remains uncertain, but their craftsmanship is undeniable. The surfaces show clear evidence of deliberate shaping and polishing, and the symmetry of the figures suggests careful planning rather than crude carving. Even more intriguing are the petroglyphs and carved stone slabs discovered throughout the site. These stones feature geometric motifs, spiral patterns, animals, and human faces etched with striking precision. Many of the carved lines maintain a consistent depth and width, implying controlled carving techniques rather than random chiseling. Some researchers have noted that certain grooves appear to have been cut with such regularity that they resemble marks produced by metal tools, even though there is no clear evidence that the Barrels culture possessed advanced metallurgy. The apparent paradox raises an important question. How did these ancient artisans achieve such accuracy using only stone or bone tools? Comparisons with other ancient stoneworking traditions highlight the mystery even further. In Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the Inca famously shaped massive stone blocks with astonishing precision, but they possessed a highly organized labor system and sophisticated engineering knowledge. Similarly, the megalithic structures at Pumapunku in Bolivia display carefully cut stone surfaces and geometric carvings that continue to puzzle researchers. Yet Sitio Bariles predates many of these achievements and was created by a society believed to be smaller and less centralized. Despite this, the carvings show a comparable level of attention to detail on a smaller scale. Some scholars have suggested that repeated grinding with harder stones or abrasive sand might explain the precision, but replicating the exact results experimentally has proven extremely difficult. The arrangement of carved stones within the site adds another layer of mystery. Excavations revealed that many statues and carved slabs were positioned within a central ceremonial area surrounded by stone foundations. Some stones appear aligned along pathways or plazas, suggesting they played a role in ritual gatherings. In several locations, archaeologists discovered large flat stones shaped into what appear to be ceremonial seats or platforms. These stones also display polished surfaces and carved motifs, implying that they were intentionally designed rather than naturally formed. The placement of these seats around open spaces has led researchers to speculate that they may have been used by religious leaders or elite members of society during public ceremonies. Further excavations uncovered a wide range of artifacts that shed light on the broader culture of the Baril's people. Pottery fragments found at the site exhibit intricate decorations and distinctive forms characteristic of the Greater Cherokee cultural tradition. Some ceramic vessels show painted designs and carefully molded shapes, demonstrating advanced pottery techniques. Stone tools and grinding implements were also discovered, indicating that the inhabitants possessed a well-developed craft economy. However, despite these discoveries, many aspects of the culture remain poorly understood. The language spoken by the inhabitants is unknown, and their political organization remains largely speculative. One particularly puzzling aspect of Sitio Bariles is the apparent combination of artistic sophistication and technological simplicity. On one hand, the society appears to have relied primarily on stone tools and traditional crafting methods. On the other hand, the carvings produced at the site demonstrate a level of precision that rivals the stone art of more technologically advanced civilizations. This contradiction has sparked debate among archaeologists for decades. Some researchers argue that the carvings represent the culmination of centuries of accumulated craftsmanship, refined through generations of artisans. Others suggest that the techniques used may have involved specialized knowledge, perhaps lost over time, that allowed workers to shape extremely hard stone with surprising efficiency. Modern archaeological studies continue to examine the site using improved analytical methods. Laser scanning and microscopic analysis of carving marks have been used to study the surfaces of several statues, whereas these investigations have revealed evidence of repetitive grinding and controlled percussion techniques, indicating that artisans likely used combinations of hammerstones and abrasive materials. Even so, the time and labor required to produce these sculptures would have been enormous. Creating a single statue from basalt could have taken weeks or even months of continuous work, especially if only stone tools were available. How do you think the ancient people of Sitio Bariles were able to carve such precise shapes into extremely hard volcanic stone using only simple tools? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden in the arid plains of Balochistan, in what is now Pakistan, the ancient site of Mehrgarh stands as one of the earliest known centers of human civilization. Dating back to around 7,000 years before the Common Era, this settlement predates the great cities of the Indus Valley civilization by several millennia and offers a rare glimpse into the technological abilities of some of the earliest farming communities on Earth. Discovered in 1974 by a French archaeological mission led by Jean-François Jarige, Mehrgarh immediately drew global attention because it revealed a surprisingly complex society existing at a time when many other regions of the world were still dominated by small nomadic hunter-gatherer groups. Over decades of excavation carried out by teams from the French archaeological mission to Pakistan and the Department of Archaeology of Pakistan, researchers uncovered layers of occupation stretching across several thousand years. These layers contain evidence of early agriculture, organized architecture, sophisticated pottery production, and even primitive medical practices. Yet among all these discoveries, one particular technological achievement continues to puzzle researchers and provoke intense debate: the astonishingly precise stone bead manufacturing techniques practiced by the inhabitants of Mehrgarh. To understand why this discovery is so extraordinary, it is important to consider the broader technological context of the time. Around 7,000 years before the Common Era, most Neolithic communities produced simple ornaments made from bone, shell, or roughly shaped stones. Drilling through hard mineral materials was extremely difficult because the available tools were typically made of stone or early copper. However, excavations at Mehrgarh revealed thousands of beads crafted from semi-precious stones such as lapis lazuli, turquoise, carnelian, and agate, many of which display drilling precision that seems almost incompatible with the technological limitations of the period. Some beads measure only a few millimeters in diameter, yet contain perfectly centered holes that run through their entire length. Even more remarkable are the long, cylindrical beads made from carnelian, some reaching several centimeters in length while maintaining narrow, straight perforations from one end to the other. Look, when archaeologists first examined these artifacts in the 1970s, many initially believed they might belong to later historical periods, but stratigraphic analysis confirmed that the beads originated from the earliest phases of the settlement. Detailed microscopic studies conducted in laboratories in France and Pakistan later revealed that the holes inside many Mehrgarh beads were created using a rotational drilling technique, likely involving stone drill bits made of flint or chert. Experimental archaeology has attempted to reproduce these methods using replica tools. Researchers found that drilling a hole through a small carnelian bead using a simple stone drill could take several hours of continuous rotation, requiring careful control of pressure and alignment to prevent cracking the stone. Despite these challenges, the craftsmen of Mehrgarh produced beads with astonishing uniformity and consistency. In some cases, the inner walls of the drilled holes show microscopic spiral grooves, indicating a controlled, rotating motion similar to that used in modern mechanical drilling. This raises an intriguing question. How did Neolithic artisans achieve such stability and precision without advanced equipment? One hypothesis suggests that the people of Mehrgarh may have developed an early form of bow drill, a tool that uses a string wrapped around a drill shaft and moved back and forth with a bow to produce rapid rotational motion. Bow drills are known from later ancient cultures, including those of Egypt and Mesopotamia, but direct physical evidence of such tools from Mehrgarh is extremely limited. Nevertheless, the pattern of drilling marks on many beads strongly supports the idea that a mechanical rotation device was used rather than simple hand drilling. If this interpretation is correct, it would imply that the inhabitants of Mehrgarh had already developed sophisticated mechanical tools thousands of years earlier than previously assumed. The scale of bead production at Mehrgarh is also remarkable. Excavations across different occupational layers revealed large quantities of unfinished beads, broken drill bits, and stone fragments, suggesting that bead manufacturing may have been a specialized craft industry within the settlement. Some researchers estimate that thousands of beads could have been produced over several generations. The presence of lapis lazuli is particularly interesting because the nearest major source of this deep blue mineral lies in the Badakhshan region of modern Afghanistan, hundreds of kilometers away. This indicates that the people of Mehrgarh were not only skilled craftsmen, but were also connected to early long-distance trade networks that transported valuable raw materials across vast regions of Central and South Asia. When compared with bead-making traditions in other ancient civilizations, the sophistication of Mehrgarh becomes even more striking. In many early Neolithic sites in Europe and the Near East, beads were often irregularly shaped and drilled from only one side, resulting in off-center perforations. By contrast, numerous beads from Mehrgarh exhibit bidirectional drilling, where craftsmen drilled from both ends to meet precisely in the center. Achieving this level of alignment requires remarkable spatial awareness and careful control of drilling angles. Even with modern tools, drilling a narrow hole through a fragile semi-precious stone without breaking it can be challenging. Yet the artisans of Mehrgarh appear to have mastered this technique more than 9,000 years ago. The mystery deepens when researchers consider the broader technological implications of this craft. Producing finely drilled beads requires not only the ability to rotate a drill rapidly, but also knowledge of abrasive materials such as fine sand that could accelerate the cutting process. Some archaeologists propose that quartz sand or crushed stone powder may have been used as an abrasive lubricant between the drill tip and the bead surface. If so, this suggests that Mehrgar craftsmen possessed an advanced understanding of material science long before the formal development of metallurgy and engineering. Excavations in the early 2010s also uncovered workshops within the settlement, where bead production likely took place. These areas contained clusters of stone debris, drill fragments, and partially finished ornaments, providing strong evidence that bead manufacturing was an organized activity rather than a casual craft practiced occasionally by individuals. The existence of such specialized production zones hints at a level of economic organization and social complexity that challenges traditional views of early Neolithic communities. Despite decades of research, many aspects of Mehrgar's bead-making technology remain unresolved. No complete drilling apparatus has ever been discovered, leaving scientists to reconstruct the tools based only on microscopic traces left on the beads themselves. Furthermore, the sheer consistency of the drilling suggests that craftsmen were highly trained specialists, possibly passing down their knowledge through generations. This raises fascinating questions about how technical skills were taught and preserved in prehistoric societies that had no written language. The stone beads of Mehrgar are more than simple ornaments. They reveal a surprisingly advanced technological tradition for the Neolithic era. Combined with evidence of early dentistry, organized architecture, and skilled pottery, these artifacts suggest that the people of Mehrgar possessed remarkable knowledge of tools and materials. Yet even today, the exact techniques they used to drill such precise holes into hard stones nearly 9,000 years ago remain a mystery. How do you think the ancient people of Mehrgar were able to drill extremely tiny and precise holes into hard stones nearly 9,000 years ago? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. The Castelluccio rock necropolis in Sicily has always been regarded as one of the most mysterious burial complexes of the Mediterranean Bronze Age, not only because of its antiquity, but also due to the meticulous craftsmanship of its construction, which continues to astonish modern researchers. Upon first approaching this remote area, one is immediately struck by its rugged location on steep rocky slopes, a place seemingly unsuitable for any large-scale architectural activity. Yet it was precisely in this hard-to-reach terrain that an ancient culture, known today as the Castelluccio culture, created a necropolis featuring dozens of finely excavated rock-cut tombs, cleverly arranged and bearing artistic, ritualistic, and technical elements far beyond what one might expect for their time. What makes Castelluccio remarkable is that everything left behind, from the tomb entrances and passageways to the dome chambers and deeply carved stone motifs, reflects a level of social organization, aesthetics, and technological capability surpassing what is typically associated with the 18th to 15th centuries BCE. However, the greatest mystery, the center of all debate, lies in the trolley-style tomb structures, with their stone domes built entirely through a dry stone stacking technique, without mortar, yet remaining solid after more than 3 millennia. At Castelluccio, the presence of tholos-type tombs, circular, domed structures more commonly associated with advanced civilizations, forces archaeologists to ask, how could the ancient people here, believed to possess only rudimentary bronze tools, cut, shape, and assemble stone with such precision? The truly structures in this necropolis consist of layers of stone stacked in concentric rings, each tier slightly narrowing inward to form a corbelled vault. Remarkably, the stones were fitted so precisely that almost no gaps remain, and the entire dome stands firm through internal force distribution alone, requiring no binding material. This technique only reappears at comparable sophistication thousands of years later, and even today it is difficult to replicate with exactness. These truly tombs not only remain intact but have also withstood the forces of time, climate, and erosion, a clear testament to the Castelluccio people's mastery over stone far exceeding what official historical narratives have typically acknowledged. Inside the rock-cut tombs, archaeologists have found numerous grave goods revealing the complexity of this ancient society. Distinctive pottery, small tools made of bronze and stone, bracelets, and small figurines demonstrate refined craftsmanship and elaborate funerary rituals. Even more intriguing, some vessels and decorative motifs show puzzling similarities to those from distant cultures such as Anatolia and the Balkans, despite the lack of clear evidence for long-distance trade during this period. This raises questions about the extent of Mediterranean interaction, or the possibility of a deeper yet unexplained cultural connection that scholars have not fully understood. The tomb entrances of the necropolis reveal another layer of mystery, as many are adorned with double spirals or concentric circles, symbols repeatedly seen in various ancient civilizations and often connected to cycles of life-death rebirth, solar worship, or cosmic motion. Yet no written record from the Castelluccio people survives to explain their meaning. These could represent ritual symbols, a religious coding system, or simply artistic decoration, but their consistent and deliberate use suggests they played an important role in the worldview of this ancient community. The necropolis's location is equally perplexing. The Castelluccio people chose to build tombs on steep cliffs where transporting bodies, large stones, and construction materials would have been incredibly difficult. Some researchers theorize that they sought to place the dead closer to the sky, or in positions offering significant views related to astronomical events. Others believe the area may have held sacred status long before the necropolis was created, with the burial complex expanding from an earlier spiritual tradition. However, no definitive explanation has been identified. Adding to the enigma is the sudden disappearance of the Castelluccio culture. After several centuries of existence, they seem to vanish from the archaeological record without evidence of warfare, epidemic, or major natural disaster. Some scholars propose assimilation into incoming populations. Others suggest climate change forced migration. More radical interpretations point to a cultural collapse yet to be uncovered. The absence of transitional evidence makes the entire narrative increasingly puzzling, and despite the many mysteries surrounding Castelluccio, the most debated element remains the dry stone corbelling technique that formed the truly styled tombs. These stone domes are not only physical proof of advanced construction ability beyond expectations for the Bronze Age, they also indicate a deep understanding of gravity, force distribution, and stone behavior. Such knowledge typically appears only in highly developed civilizations, passed down through generations of skilled builders. Yet the Castelluccio community, likely small in population and leaving behind few architectural traces outside the necropolis, achieved what many larger ancient societies could not. This leads experts to ask, did they develop this technique independently or inherit it from an even older culture? Yeah, could there have been a long-lost network of shared knowledge across the Mediterranean? Or does this reveal that ancient technical sophistication was far more complex than we currently assume? More than 3,000 years have passed, yet the Castelluccio rock necropolis still stands like a stone book never completely opened. Its domed tombs, spiral carvings, remote cliffside location, and abrupt cultural disappearance collectively form a mystery without resolution. But above all, the truly structures and their extraordinary dry stone craftsmanship make Castelluccio one of the strongest reminders that the past may be more complex than we imagine. and that what ancient people left behind often surpasses the boundaries imposed by conventional historical models. In your opinion, what is the most plausible explanation for the extraordinary dry stone construction technique and the mysterious disappearance of the Castelluccio culture? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising dramatically above the plains of central Mali, the Bandiagara escarpment. Mali stands as one of the most extraordinary archaeological landscapes in Africa, stretching for roughly 150 kilometers and reaching heights of nearly 500 meters in some sections. This immense sandstone cliff forms a natural wall across the Sahel. Along its face and within its crevices lie hundreds of ancient structures clinging precariously to the rock, many of them constructed centuries ago by cultures whose techniques still puzzle modern researchers. The escarpment has been inhabited for many generations, most notably by the Dogon people, but long before their arrival, another mysterious culture known as the Telem occupied the cliffs. Archaeological surveys conducted throughout the 20th century revealed that the Telem built homes, shrines, burial chambers, and storage structures directly into the vertical rock face. Some of these buildings appear almost impossibly placed, positioned dozens of meters above the ground on narrow ledges where even experienced climbers struggle to stand securely today. Yet among all the enigmas surrounding this site, perhaps the most fascinating is the astonishing durability of the structures themselves, many of which were constructed using materials that should have deteriorated long ago. The architecture of Bandiagara relies heavily on a mixture of mud, clay, and small stones. Materials that, under normal circumstances, would be expected to erode quickly under the intense environmental stresses of the Sahel. The region experiences extreme temperature fluctuations, seasonal monsoon rains, and powerful desert winds carrying abrasive sand. In many parts of the world, buildings made primarily from mud brick collapse within decades unless constantly repaired. However, at Bandiagara, numerous structures believed to be several hundred years old, and possibly more than 1,000 years old, remain remarkably intact. Archaeologists studying the site since the 1930s have repeatedly expressed surprise at how well these constructions have endured. During excavations carried out by French archaeologist Marcel Griola and later teams throughout the mid-20th century, researchers documented granaries and cliff dwellings whose outer walls still preserve their original form despite centuries of exposure. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from some structures suggests that certain Telem constructions may date back as far as the 11th or 12th century. Even after nearly a millennium of environmental stress, the walls remain compact and resistant to erosion. What makes this durability so intriguing is that the building mixture used at Bandiagara appears deceptively simple. Samples collected during modern geological analyses show that the material consists primarily of local clay combined with fine sand, crushed stone fragments, and organic fibers such as straw or plant roots. This mixture resembles traditional earthen building techniques used across Africa and the Middle East, yet the performance of Bandiagara's structures appears unusually resilient. In comparison, many adobe structures in other parts of the world, such as those found in ancient settlements of the American Southwest or North Africa, require constant maintenance and often degrade rapidly when abandoned. By contrast, several abandoned Telem structures have remained standing for centuries without repair. Some researchers believe that the secret may lie in the precise ratio of clay to mineral particles in the local soil. The sandstone cliffs of the escarpment slowly weather into extremely fine sediment rich in silica and natural binding agents. When mixed with clay and organic fibers, this material may create a form of natural composite that hardens more effectively than ordinary mud brick. Another possible factor contributing to the longevity of these structures is the architectural placement itself. Many buildings are tucked into recessed areas of the cliff face, protected from direct rainfall and strong winds. This positioning effectively shields them from the most destructive environmental forces. Measurements taken during archaeological surveys show that some of the granaries are located between 20 and 40 meters above the base of the cliff, often beneath natural overhangs that act as protective roofs. This ingenious use of the natural landscape dramatically reduces water infiltration and erosion. The builders appear to have carefully selected locations where the rock geometry provided structural protection, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of environmental engineering. Even today, modern conservationists studying earthen architecture consider these cliff structures remarkable examples of passive durability. The design of the buildings themselves also reveals subtle technological knowledge. Many of the small granaries found along the cliffs have cylindrical walls and conical roofs, constructed from tightly packed clay, reinforced with wooden supports. The cylindrical shape distributes structural stress evenly, preventing cracks from spreading through the walls. Meanwhile, the steeply sloped roofs allow rainwater to run off quickly, minimizing moisture absorption. In some cases, archaeologists have observed that the outer surfaces of the walls were coated with an additional thin layer of refined clay plaster. This finishing layer may have functioned as a protective sealant, similar to modern stucco coatings. Microscopic examination of plaster fragments recovered during excavations suggests that the mixture may contain plant oils or natural resins, substances that could increase water resistance. However, the exact composition of these coatings remains uncertain, as organic compounds degrade over long periods of time. Excavations carried out in the 1960s and again in the early 2000s uncovered further evidence that the builders possessed an advanced practical knowledge of materials. In several cliff dwellings, archaeologists discovered layers of compacted clay floors reinforced with stone fragments, arranged in a lattice-like pattern. This technique resembles modern stabilization methods used to strengthen earthen floors and foundations. Such findings imply that the builders were not merely stacking mud bricks, but were deliberately engineering composite structures designed to withstand stress and environmental wear. Even more remarkable is the fact that these techniques appear to have been developed without written records or formal architectural documentation. Instead, the knowledge must have been transmitted orally across generations, refined through centuries of experimentation with local materials. The durability of Bandiagara's mudstone architecture becomes even more impressive when compared to other ancient earthen sites. For example, the adobe city of Chanchan in Peru, built around the 13th century, has suffered severe erosion despite significant conservation efforts. Similarly, many ancient mud brick settlements in Mesopotamia have largely dissolved into low mounds after millennia of exposure. Yet at Bandiagara, cliffside structures remain visibly recognizable, with walls and granaries still protruding from the rock face. Some of these constructions appear so well preserved that they seem almost recent, even though archaeological evidence suggests they may predate the arrival of the Dogon people in the region several centuries ago. Ultimately, the Bandiagara escarpment is more than a striking landscape. Its centuries-old mudstone structures show the remarkable ingenuity of ancient builders. Despite modern research, key mysteries remain, such as the exact clay formula, protective coatings, and how materials were moved to such extreme heights. These cliffs still hint that ancient engineering knowledge may have been far more advanced than we once believed. How do you think the ancient builders of Bandiagara managed to create mudstone structures that could survive for hundreds or even thousands of years on such steep cliffs? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Hidden deep within the deserts of northern Sudan lies one of the most mysterious architectural landscapes of the ancient world. The Meroe Pyramids, the royal burial ground of the powerful kingdom of Kush. built between roughly 300 BCE and 350 CE, this vast necropolis contains more than 200 pyramids rising from the golden sands of Nubia. In fact, the region around Meroe contains a greater number of pyramids than Egypt itself. Yet despite their quantity and striking appearance, the pyramids of Meroe remain far less understood than their famous counterparts, such as the Great Pyramid of Giza. Archaeologists continue to investigate how the Kushite builders achieved such precise stone construction, unusual structural designs, and large-scale building programs in a harsh desert environment over 2,000 years ago. Among all the mysteries surrounding these monuments, perhaps the most intriguing is the extraordinary precision with which their stones were cut and assembled. Unlike the gigantic pyramids of Egypt, which were constructed from massive limestone blocks sometimes weighing several tons, the pyramids of Meroe were generally built using smaller sandstone blocks. At first glance, this might suggest simpler construction methods. However, closer examination has revealed a level of precision that is surprisingly sophisticated. Many of the stone blocks display flat surfaces, straight edges, and near-perfect right angles that allowed them to fit tightly together with minimal gaps. In several pyramids excavated by archaeologists during the 20th century, the joints between stones were measured to be only a few millimeters wide. This is remarkable considering that the builders were working with tools that were likely made of iron or bronze rather than modern steel cutting equipment. Archaeological investigations carried out in the early 20th century by American archaeologist George Andrew Reisner from Harvard University and the Museum of Fine Arts Boston revealed detailed evidence of this stone craftsmanship. Reisner's expeditions between 1907 and 1910 carefully documented the masonry of numerous pyramids at Meroe. His field notes described stone courses laid with remarkable consistency, with blocks cut to uniform heights and lengths that allowed them to stack in stable layers despite the steep pyramid angle. Later surveys confirmed that some stones were shaped with surprising accuracy, suggesting that Kushite builders had developed reliable methods for measuring, cutting, and finishing sandstone blocks. One of the most puzzling aspects of the stonework is how these ancient craftsmen achieved such precise cuts. Sandstone, while softer than granite, is still difficult to shape accurately without advanced tools. Yet many of the blocks used in the Meroe pyramids appear to have smooth faces and squared edges. Some researchers believe the builders may have used a combination of iron chisels, stone hammers, and abrasion techniques involving sand. However, even with these methods, producing hundreds of evenly shaped blocks for each pyramid would have required remarkable skill and organization. The precision suggests the use of consistent measuring systems and possibly wooden templates or marking tools to guide the cutting process. Comparisons with Egyptian pyramid construction make the mystery even more intriguing. The pyramids at Giza, built roughly 2,000 years earlier, relied on massive limestone blocks placed in carefully leveled courses. In contrast, the pyramids at Meroe are far steeper, with slopes approaching 70 degrees compared to about 51 degrees at Giza. This steep design means that each layer of stone had to be positioned with particular accuracy to maintain structural stability. Any misalignment could have caused the outer faces to collapse or slide. Yet many of the pyramids remained standing for more than 2 millennia, demonstrating that the Kushite engineers had mastered the geometry and stone placement necessary to maintain such extreme angles. Archaeologists have also discovered evidence that the stones used in the pyramids were quarried from sources located several kilometers away from the construction sites. Transporting these blocks across desert terrain would have required organized labor and logistical planning. While the blocks are smaller than those used in Egypt, hundreds of them were still needed for each structure. Once transported, they had to be shaped precisely and positioned in carefully aligned courses. The outer layers of some pyramids were originally covered with finely finished casing stones, which would have created smooth surfaces reflecting sunlight across the desert landscape. Another fascinating discovery emerged during excavations in the late 20th century, when archaeologists began examining tool marks left on the stones. These marks revealed patterns consistent with repeated chisel strikes, suggesting controlled shaping rather than rough cutting. In certain blocks, faint guidelines appear to have been carved before the final shaping, possibly serving as markers for craftsmen to follow while cutting. This implies a level of planning and coordination among workers, with specific roles assigned for measuring, cutting, transporting, and placing the stones. Despite these discoveries, many questions remain unanswered, and no surviving texts from the Kingdom of Kush describe the methods used to construct the pyramids. Unlike Egypt, where inscriptions and reliefs sometimes depict building activities, the Kushite pyramids provide very few clues about the construction process itself. Much of the knowledge about their techniques must therefore be reconstructed from archaeological evidence alone. Complicating matters further, many of the pyramids were heavily damaged during the 19th century by treasure hunters searching for gold and artifacts. One of the most notorious figures associated with this destruction was the Italian explorer Giuseppe Ferlini, who in 1834 used explosives to blast open the tops of several pyramids. Although he eventually discovered jewelry belonging to a Kushite queen, the damage destroyed valuable archaeological information about the original structures. As a result, some of the most important evidence regarding how the pyramids were built may have been lost forever. Modern archaeological surveys using drone photography, 3D scanning, and satellite imagery are now providing new insights into the site. These technologies have allowed researchers to map the entire necropolis with remarkable precision, revealing patterns in pyramid placement and orientation. Some pyramids appear to align with others in carefully planned arrangements, suggesting that their builders were not only skilled stonemasons, but also knowledgeable in geometry and spatial planning. Today, the Merkbe pyramids stand as remarkable evidence of an advanced civilization whose engineering knowledge is still not fully understood. Their steep forms differ greatly from the Great Pyramid of Giza, yet the precision with which their sandstone blocks were cut and fitted continues to puzzle archaeologists. How did craftsmen more than 2,000 years ago achieve such accuracy with relatively simple tools? And how did they organize the labor needed to build more than 200 pyramids in the harsh Nubian desert? Despite modern research, the full construction techniques of the Kushite builders remain unknown, leaving the pyramids of Meroe as one of the enduring mysteries of ancient engineering. How do you think ancient builders managed to cut and fit these stones so precisely over 2,000 years ago? Hidden deep within a lush river valley on the Indonesian island of Bali lies one of Southeast Asia's most puzzling archaeological sites, the ancient complex of Gunung Kawi Temple Complex. Carved dramatically into the steep cliffs along the sacred Pakeresan River, this remarkable monument dates back to approximately the 11th century and is widely associated with the royal dynasty of the Balinese king Udayana Wamadewa and his descendants. Although Gunung Kawi is often described as a temple complex, its construction method alone places it among the most unusual ancient structures in the world. Rather than being assembled from blocks of stone like most temples across Asia, the shrines here were created through a radically different process. They were carved directly into the solid volcanic rock of the cliff itself. This technique, known as rock-cut architecture, required ancient craftsmen to remove enormous quantities of stone while simultaneously shaping intricate architectural forms with remarkable precision. The site consists of 10 monumental shrines, each rising roughly 7 meters high, arranged in 2 dramatic groups on opposite sides of the valley. 5 of the shrines stand in a row on the eastern cliff face, while 4 more appear across the river on the western side, with a final isolated shrine nearby. From a distance, they resemble towering temple facades embedded in the mountain, as if entire sanctuaries had been frozen inside the rock. What makes these structures particularly mysterious is the sheer difficulty of the technique used to create them. Unlike masonry temples where stones can be shaped individually and assembled later, rock-cut monuments require the builders to work from the top downward, carefully removing stone without making mistakes that could ruin the entire structure. Once carved, the design cannot be corrected. Archaeologists estimate that creating just one of the shrines would have required removing hundreds of tons of rock from the cliff face. When multiplied by 10 monuments and additional surrounding chambers, the total amount of stone removed from the valley likely reached several thousand tons. Yet no clear evidence of large debris fields or organized quarry dumps has been identified near the site, leaving researchers uncertain about how the ancient builders managed the massive volume of excavated material. The precision of the carvings is equally striking. The shrines are not rough recesses in the rock. Yes, they are carefully sculpted architectural facades that imitate the multi-tiered towers typical of ancient Javanese and Balinese temple design. The vertical lines of the structures are remarkably straight, their proportions balanced, and their decorative ledges evenly spaced. Measurements taken during archaeological surveys in the 20th century show that the shrines follow consistent geometric proportions, despite being carved into uneven cliff surfaces. Maintaining such symmetry would have required careful planning and skilled execution, especially considering that the workers were likely standing on wooden scaffolding attached to a near-vertical rock wall. Even today, achieving this level of precision using only basic hand tools would be a formidable engineering challenge. The first systematic archaeological investigations of Gunung Kawi began during the Dutch colonial period in the early 20th century, when European researchers surveying Bali's ancient monuments documented the site's unusual architecture. Later excavations in the 1950s and 1970s provided additional insights into its history and religious function. Scholars concluded that the complex was probably built as a royal memorial site, honouring members of the Warmadewa dynasty. Inscriptions discovered nearby refer to a king named Anak Wungsu, a ruler of Bali in the 11th century, whose family lineage may be commemorated by the shrines carved into the cliffs. However, even if the site served as a funerary monument, the decision to construct it in such a technically demanding way remains puzzling. In other parts of Southeast Asia during the same period, temples were typically built using stacked stone or brick, which allowed builders to expand and modify structures more easily. Choosing instead to carve entire temple facades directly into a mountain required far more labor and planning. Comparisons with other rock-cut monuments around the world only deepen the mystery. Sites such as the caves of Ajanta Caves or the temples of Ellora Caves in India demonstrate that ancient civilizations were capable of carving elaborate sanctuaries from solid stone. However, those complexes often contain dozens of chambers extending deep into the rock. Gunung Kawi is different. Its shrines are monumental facades exposed to the open valley, almost like giant relief sculptures carved into the cliff. In this sense, it resembles the rock-cut tombs of Petra in Jordan, yet Petra's facades were carved into relatively softer sandstone, while the cliffs of Gunung Kawi consist largely of volcanic tuff, hardened by centuries of geological processes. This material is significantly more difficult to shape with simple tools, raising further questions about the techniques employed by the builders. Another intriguing aspect of Gunung Kawi is the arrangement of the shrines across the valley. Rather than forming a single temple compound, the monuments are divided between 2 cliffs separated by the Pakerison River. Archaeologists have proposed that this symmetrical placement may have had symbolic meaning connected to Balinese cosmology, which often emphasizes balance between opposing forces in nature. The river itself was considered sacred, and its presence may have played a role in purification rituals associated with royal memorial ceremonies. However, no definitive explanation has been found to confirm why the shrines were positioned exactly where they are. Surrounding the main monuments are additional carved features that deepen the site's mystery. Small caves and meditation chambers are cut into the rock walls near the shrines, some containing stone platforms that may have served as places for hermits or priests to sit during religious practices. Narrow stairways and terraces carved into the hillside suggest that the entire valley may once have been an integrated ceremonial landscape rather than a single isolated monument. Excavations have also uncovered fragments of ancient irrigation channels nearby, hinting that the surrounding environment was carefully managed as part of a broader sacred complex linked to Bali's traditional water temple culture. Despite decades of research, many questions remain unanswered. Archaeologists still debate how long the construction of Gunung Kawi actually took. Some estimates suggest that hundreds of workers could have spent decades carving the shrines, while others argue that the consistent style of the carvings implies a shorter, more concentrated building campaign. The tools used by the craftsmen are also uncertain. Iron chisels were known in the region during the 11th century, but the durability required to carve such large and uniform structures in volcanic rock would have demanded exceptional skill and organization. Today, thus, the Gunung Kawi temple complex remains one of Indonesia's most remarkable archaeological sites. Towering shrines carved directly into the cliffs rise above the jungle valley, creating a scene that feels almost timeless. Despite decades of research, one mystery still remains. How did a civilization more than 1,000 years ago carve such precise monuments into solid rock, using the limited tools of their time? So how do you think ancient people more than 1,000 years ago managed to carve gigantic temples directly into solid cliffs with such incredible precision? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below.